Welcome, I am Chilling Tales, and as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel. If you'd like, now put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. They warned me not to take Harlow's Bend after midnight. Every town has a road like it, the shortcut you only admit you use in daylight, the strip of cracked asphalt that feels too narrow for two cars, even though it's striped for them, the kind of place headlights never quite reach far enough. Harlow's Bend was ours. It cut through a stand of oak that had learned to lean, past a ravine that swallowed tires when the shoulder gave, across a creek that had a way of flooding only in the dark. You could make it from my sister's place on the North Ridge to my apartment on Oak and Riverside in 15 minutes on the highway, or in 9 if you shaved the curve, skipped the town lamps, and trusted your brakes. I trusted my brakes. I had trusted them for years. It was the rest of the car, me, that had started to feel suspect. I left my sister's later than I meant to. We'd been in the attic again, sorting through what our mother left, a veil sealed in a zip bag that had gone the color of tea, photo albums with paper corners losing their glue, a music box that had never once wound without squealing like it was objecting to being asked to remember. We found our father's army jacket and a letter he never sent. We found the half-finished baby sweater our mother had started for a child that didn't make it to winter. We found at the bottom of a tub of Christmas lights 3 Polaroids of Harlow's Bend in daylight from before the county stopped mowing the ditches. Ribbons of road, nothing to be afraid of. By the time we'd put it all back in different boxes and had exactly the same argument about exactly the same things, keep, trash, no, that's not trash, rain had started, big lazy drops that hit the porch light like moths. My sister offered the couch. I said no. I thought I needed to drive, and if I had stayed, I would have taken the couch long enough to dream the kind of dream that makes you square your shoulders for 3 days. The highway was closed after the river bridge. A crane stood where lanes should be, blinking red like a scolding. The detour sign pointed toward town, long and patient. Harlow's Bend cut 30 minutes off the drive. The sign didn't say not to. The rain wasn't bad yet. I told myself the stories were for kids. I told myself I lacked that caliber of superstition. So I turned down the bend. The first mile is always fine. It's a 2-lane with a line that's more suggestion than law, and the trees don't lean yet. They stand there like they're making themselves available for the idea of a forest. The first culvert rattled my tires the way it always did. I passed the rusty mailbox with no name, where teenagers leave notes for each other in summer. The gap in the fence where the deer pretend they need an invitation. My wipers squealed their small, infuriated squeal. At the second mile, the trees close in. Even in daylight, there's a hush there, the air gone mossy and heavier. At night, the oaks knit their branches like women in pews, and the road loses the word shoulder. My headlights always feel weaker here, like they're working through grief. This time they felt like they were working through my grief. I leaned forward, chin over the wheel, and tried not to make bargains with my own eyes. The sign came up too fast and also right on time. Slow curve ahead. It's a rectangle pitted with rust and old BB shots, the kind of sign the county replaces every other year, and this road eats as practice. It was swaying on its post, just slightly, though the night had gone windless. The rain hit it, ping, ping, and the swaying didn't change. Okay, I said out loud. Saying okay to nobody is a way of telling yourself you're the one who gets to answer. I eased my foot. The car did that float thing it does when you find the edge between control and the road, doing you a favor. The radio crackled to life. I hadn't turned it on. Static bleached the air, then cleared like someone lifting a bowl off a candle. Under it, A voice, not a station, not a song, a voice in the register of a person trying not to panic. Don't stop, it whispered, shredded, no matter what you see. I thumbed the dial out of reflex. The needle didn't move, or it moved and the sound didn't change. The voice shivered up through the speakers, as if it was using my wire. Keep driving, it said, not louder exactly, closer. I pressed the power button. The radio went dead. The silence after had a texture, fine like dust. The curve is tighter than it looks. You can make it without touching the center line if you've had enough practice, and nothing unexpected is there to argue. My lights swung, slick across black. They slid over bark, over wet. They found the woman standing at the shoulder. She wore white. Maybe it had been white once. Now rain had glued it to her body. A slip, or a dress, or some nightgown that shouldn't have been anywhere but a house. Hair dark with water stuck to her cheeks. One hand lifted, thumb out, that old American prayer. I have driven past men with signs, and women with strollers, and boys who thought they could outrun cars. I know how not to stop, but she lifted her head and looked straight through the windshield into me. Her eyes were my mother's. I braked so hard the back of the car did a little prayer to physics. The tires hissed on the wet. We stopped. We stood in it. Me, the engine knocking like a nervous knee. Her, head canted, rain dividing into small insistences on her jaw. Mom? I said, because reflex is bigger than adulthood. Her lips opened like she was learning how again. Please, she said, caught between breath and word. It's cold. Let me in. There's the part of your brain that remembers what 7 feels like. There's the part that has a stack of notices about this exact situation clipped and waiting in a drawer. It's not her, the adult told me, efficient. It's the road. You don't know that, a smaller voice said, sullen, and I hated it for sounding like me. I thumbed the lock. She slipped in like rain slips under doors. You swear you closed. The smell of her was rain and something tinny I didn't want to identify. Her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a nurse to take her back. Up close she had my mother's face, and also not. The planes were right. The story underneath wasn't. Thank you, she said, and smiled, and the smile was almost right. Then I glanced in the rear view. A man sat in the back seat. I hadn't heard the door. I hadn't felt the shift of weight. He was just there, thin the way hungry can be elegant, a gray suit that didn't belong anywhere but a photograph, a grin that didn't have anything to do with a mouth. I jerked the wheel. The car swayed. Who are you? I asked the mirror. The woman didn't turn. She stared ahead through the fogging glass like a patient in a waiting room they keep too cold, the expression blank and effortful. The man leaned forward until his mouth was near my ear, and the cold of him went through the cotton of my shirt as if it had been waiting for that particular patch of skin. You shouldn't have stopped, he said, almost politely. Now it knows you. I floored the gas. The car fishtailed, caught itself, roared. The curve stretched, then collapsed. Trees became lines, and then noise. The woman didn't move. The man's laughter came from behind my face. The next sign came sooner than it should have. Same rust freckles, same tilt, slow curve ahead. I cursed and braked, and my car stopped in exactly the same place it had before, down to the way the hood dipped. She was there again. The woman, white gone transparent, thumb out, the wet shine of her face. I spun to the passenger seat. Empty. To the back. Empty. The radio hissed as if it had been breath the whole time. Don't stop, the voice said, faint enough for honesty. Don't stop again. I believed that. I believed it enough to hurt. I dropped the car into drive and went around wide. My light swept her face just enough for me to see she had stopped trying to look like my mother. She wore some other arrangement of bones now, something hungrier. Her mouth widened as if to take a mouthful of my car, and then she did what all animals do when you don't give them what they flatter themselves to be owed. She smiled like she'd be patient. the road kept looping. I don't mean I kept getting lost. Lost is when choices become stories, and every story fights for your mouth. This was a loop. I could have set my watch by it if my watch had not stopped at the moment the radio found a voice. Rain blurred the windshield. The speedometer found speeds I don't usually offer it, and every time the sign slid out of the trees like a repeat. Every time the bend made the shape of itself, and the shoulder offered the woman like a test nobody passes the first time. I drove past her 5 times. 6. On the 7th, she wasn't on the shoulder. She was in the middle of the road, hands at her sides like a girl waiting for a photo. I didn't stop. I didn't stop because I am capable of obedience when it is the only weapon left. I leaned on the horn, and my car's poor voice made the hollow sound like it was protesting a tax. I swerved around her, wide enough to spray the ditch, and for a full second we were window to window, and she tilted her head as if to memorize the angle of mine. I drove. The loop does not forgive, but it learns. By the 10th pass, there were more of them. A boy I'd sat next to in sophomore English, hair still blonde and likely forever now wet. My father sober and unhandsome, which is how he tried to be near the end. My first kiss, which felt like a cruelty because it reminded me of poor judgment that had not required supernatural assistance to acquire. They stood in the rain, or sat on the guardrail that hasn't guarded anything since the year they paved the road and forgot to pave sense into it. They raised thumbs. They kept their smiles gentle until you got just close enough to see how they were welded on. The radio was not a voice now. It had turned into voices. They overlapped the way people on party lines used to. A murmur of advice that would have been easier to ignore if any of it had been unkind. Keep going. This part ends. Don't give under the name. One voice came through clearer when I passed the sign. My mother's voice, not the imitation. It said, "Don't pick me up," which is something she never had to say in life, because I have never been able to let anything sit where it wanted without asking it if it needed water. At some point, the numbers on my dash gave up. The green went out of them and left them as absent as the moon. The needle on the fuel gauge headed toward my failure. I did the math you do when you are stuck in a story, and the only way out is to live long enough for it to end. The math did not like me. On the 14th loop, the man in the back seat was there again. No door, no shift, just the particular cold his mouth makes when it wants your ear. "We can do this all night," he said, conversational, like truckers at a counter at 2 a.m. "I can't," I said, and my voice almost broke on the T. He clucked his tongue. "You can't imagine what you can do when you're invited properly." I pressed my finger into the soft place of my palm until the pain brought prayer back into the range of things I remembered how to do. On the 15th loop, something changed enough to frighten me beyond anger. The curve tightened, not by much, by the thickness of a promise. The oaks leaned another angle in, made a roof of the road, shrugged off the sky. My headlights hit a wall of rain, so heavy it looked like a curtain. The sign swayed as if someone had bumped it walking by. When the car broke through that sheet, the air tasted wrong. Less fresh, sharp, like damp copper. "We're in deeper," the man in the back seat said, pleased. "Good. Sometimes it takes a while for you to learn to listen." "I'm listening to the radio," I said, surprised by how steady I sounded. It told me not to stop. "Oh," he said, "that's me too." And he laughed. The laugh wasn't cruel. It wasn't anything. It was patience pretending to be sociable until patience could eat. On the 19th loop, the figure on the shoulder was a girl in a jacket too big for her. Jeans rolled to keep from dragging. The eyes were not anyone I knew. The mouth was. It was mine, at 13, when I discovered what a mirror could do to you if you held its gaze too long without a purpose. She lifted her thumb like hitching was a skill she'd been looking forward to mastering. I rolled past her. The radio whispered, "Good." My hands were cramping from the way I was holding the wheel. My right calf had started to send up fireworks every time I asked it for gas. I wondered if I could make the loop on cruise control and if letting the car pretend to be me would count as surrender. I did not try to find out. On the 23rd loop, there was a light. It wasn't the sign. It wasn't a car. There hadn't been any cars since the crane. It was the yellow square of a window, way off through the trees, up the hill past the bend. It looked like a gas station looks in the middle of nowhere when you have learned how to believe in good luck again. The voice on the radio went quiet. That was how I knew this light was dangerous. I gritted my teeth and drove past the curve and the shoulder with no one on it, and the place where the oaks made a tunnel and the sign that had been waiting. The yellow stayed with me. Then it was ahead again, closer. The road is a thing that thinks it is a straight line until you ask it to be. I reached a cross street that I've never seen in daylight. Four-way stop, wet paint bright, a sign with 3 places I didn't know. On the far corner, a service station that hadn't been built in this county any time I'd been alive. Glass on 3 sides, old pumps with belly dials, a Coke machine that was trying to remember its youth. The bell on the drive clicked when my tires went over it. Inside, a man stood up from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag, and smiled right at me. The door to the station swung open before I had time to decide whether my car would turn itself off if I removed the key. The man waved like we'd known each other. He wore coveralls with Harlow stitched over the breast. His hair had the shine of men who know where grease lives. The light behind him made a rectangle of his shoulders and cut a square out of the rain. "Lucky night," he said. His voice came through glass. It felt like it came up through the floor of my car. "You're near out, aren't you?" I checked the gauge. If it had any truth left, it said I was a quarter from being interesting. He laughed. "You're past empty. We can top you off. Come on in and sign." I turned the radio back on with a finger I couldn't feel. Static. Then a voice I recognized because it had told me to eat when I didn't want to sit when sitting was the worst. "Don't go inside," my mother said, very tired and very exact. The rain slackened in that way. Rain does when it wants you to feel sorry for it. Harlow, if that's what he was wearing, and that's what he wanted to be, leaned his hip against the door jamb and scratched a cheek that didn't itch. "Your mother," he said, friendly, "always thought she could keep you from making friends." I should have driven. I should have backed out with my hands steady. Instead, I reached for the handle on instinct, the human thing where another human is framed in bright, and you think, "Yes, door." The minute my fingers closed, the man's smile widened. Not like a smile does, but like a drawer does, and for a full second, the light behind him went wrong. Too cold, too white, not light at all. But the idea of light, so bright, I saw the tiny bones in his hand raised in welcome. I drove. He didn't shout. He didn't chase. He stood there with his rag, and the bell on the drive clicked twice, and the yellow square died like a TV set, clicking off. After that, the loop was different. The oaks leaned away a hair, as if embarrassed. The sign had a fresh BB scar. The smell of wet copper faded to old rain. On the 26th pass, the woman in white stood on the shoulder with her thumb out and her mouth composed and her eyes not anyone's eyes anymore. I did not stop. The radio said nothing. I decided I didn't believe in voices. The gas needle went under the red line and then under whatever goes under red. The car complained like a child who has learned the word no and enjoys its mouth feel. I said okay to nobody again. I loosened my hands. I waited to coast and knew that when I did, there would be no shoulder to save me. The car coughed, coughed. On the 29th loop, halfway between the sign and the center of the curve, the engine let go like a lover who had been kind for longer than anyone would expect. The rain had gentled to a lick. The wipers squealed, and then went still because I switched them off to hear what absence sounds like. The road carried me. Momentum, then stubbornness. The car rolled almost politely, as if it had been reminded of manners it learned in a driveway and decided to show them to me. The woman stood in the middle of the road again. Her dress clung and defined. Her hair drew letters down her neck. She did not raise her thumb. She raised her hand, palm out, the sign you use to make someone stop from across a room without talking. And because my foot was already on the brake, it felt like obedience. I could have let the car do what it would do and aim for shoulder and stall and sit with her at the window while she learned my mother's mouth again. I put it in neutral and steered for the edge. The tires found gravel. Gravel found ditch. The car settled with a long, relieved exhale, as if it had been trying to spare my feelings by taking its time. She walked toward the driver's side slow, the way women in bad commercials walk toward convertibles. Her face was my mother's again. She had found the exact wrong smile. Please, she said, and it was my mother's voice with the morphine gravel in it, and also the small humor a person uses when you are disappointing them. Don't be cruel. I'm not, I said, which was the first true thing I had said to the road. I'm busy. She laughed with both sides of her mouth. Behind her, in my back seat through the fogged glass, something made the shape of sitting. The radio clicked on by itself and made a sound like a phone connecting. A second voice. A man said, "We're almost done," as if we were both waiting for a bus. I cracked the window an inch. The air smelled like petrichor and old pennies, and the mint gum my mother chewed when she stopped smoking. What happens if I get out? I asked. The woman cocked her head. Rain streamed. You walk, she said. You walk back to where you were supposed to go, and when you turn around to see how far you've come, the road will be behind you as if it had never existed. Will you follow? She looked amused. I'm always in front. I closed the window. I turned the key. The engine offered me the small wheeze a pet gives when you try to coax it back past wanting. The radio whispered, "Foot now," and I put my foot on the gas as if the car could be tricked into remembering that wanting and doing are cousins. It coughed. It died again. I sat with my hands open on my knees. Rain dotted my jeans through the crack in the seal where the door had never fit right. In the rear view, the man leaned forward, closer now, as if about to tell me a recipe. You know, he said, there's a way to make this pleasant. You pretend your grief is a passenger, and you give it your lap, and you keep your hands on the wheel, and when it reaches for your throat, you call that intimacy. Is that what you want? I asked. Intimacy? That, he said, or patience. He put his hands on the back of my seat and the springs in its side. My mother knocked on the glass. Not anger, not demand. The knock of a person who expects to be let in because you love her and also because she is cold. I looked at her hands. The nails were wrong. My mother bit her nails until they were careful, half moons of small shame. These were clean, oval, perfect, and that was what saved me. I'm sorry, I said to the wrong hands, and the dress, and the rain, and the road, and the voice that had used the radio like a throat. I can't help you. When I put my hand on the key again, the engine started. No coaxing, no cough, just the ordinary small miracle of pistons remembering their shoulders. I slid the car back onto the asphalt like I was leaving a dance with a partner who would tell stories about me later. The woman's face fell through 3 expressions too many to belong to one person. The man in the back laughed once, the laugh of a person who lost at cards and has decided to be excellent about it. And then the radio said in my mother's true voice, "Go." So I went. The loop didn't break. That would be too much like a moral. It thinned. The oaks made a little room. The sign swayed like someone had kicked it from a passing truck. The curve felt less confident about its own geometry. When the bend unspooled into straight and the trees on either side returned to being trees instead of audience, The yellow light of town found me like it had been waiting for an apology. The car ran on fumes and relief into the empty grid of 2 a.m. My streetlights are sodium orange. They made the wet look warm. I parked under the tree that drops helicopter seeds in spring like a dad showing off for his kids. The engine ticked, rain softened to memory. When I turned the key off, the radio clicked and then whispered, so soft I thought I might be inventing it. Home. I sat there long enough for the windshield to fog over the places where my hands had been. When I lifted them, they left prints that looked exactly like prints. In the rear view, there was nothing but the back seat and my jacket thrown on it, and the dent where I'd once dropped a toolbox and lied to my landlord about it. The woman's face, my mother's face, did not swim up. The man did not make himself comfortable. The road did not find a way into my cul-de-sac and rest his elbows on my hood and ask me to step outside. Inside, I hung my keys on the hook my sister insists we have so I won't lose them. I went to the bathroom and turned the light on and looked into the mirror because sometimes bravery is just that mundane. My face was my face. The glass behind it reflected the open door, the hallway with the thrift store runner, the frame of a photograph I had hung crooked a year ago and stopped seeing. I slept with my shoes by the door and a towel over the bedroom mirror. I woke 3 times to the sound of rain that wasn't there. Once I woke to the sound of the radio in the living room, trying to tune itself. I got up and found it unplugged and put the plug on top of it like a parent does to a remote. In the morning, the sun made a promise it doesn't have to keep. I called my sister and said I was coming back to help with the attic. She asked if I'd taken the bend. I told her I'd taken the long way. Neither of us used the words for those 2 things. I don't drive Harlow's Bend. Not after midnight. Not when the rain starts. When people say shortcut, I say no. When teenagers at the diner say they saw the woman in white, I ask them what shoes she wore, and if they say they didn't look, I pay for their coffee, and I say next time, look at hands. Hands never learn how to lie correctly. Sometimes late, when the wind comes down from the ridge and the night learns where it forgot to be quiet, my radio will click in the living room. Once it said softly, keep driving, like a goodbye that did not require my answer. Once it said my name in the voice I already carry inside me, which is my mother's, and I said nothing back because some loves stay the size they are, only if you don't feed them the wrong thing. If you take Harlow's Bend after midnight, you might make it. People do. Most come back with a story that gets longer in the retelling and a smile that tries too hard for your benefit. A few come back and stop smiling as if they've used the muscles up and are saving them. A handful don't come back in the way that gets counted. If you go, keep the radio off or on. If you're the kind of person who needs a voice to argue with, don't stop. The woman will be someone you know or someone you wish you had. If you must look at hands. Don't follow yellow squares into lit rooms that don't belong to your day. If you stall, it will ask you to be polite. You may be everything else you are, but don't be that. When you get home, and you will, if you keep your hands and your yes to yourself, sit in the quiet and listen to your house breathe. Put a towel over the mirror if it makes you feel like you made a decision. Call the person who keeps your spare key and tell them you were going to call anyway. If the radio clicks and a voice uses your mother's grammar, remind the air that you already know how to drive. Sometimes the bend will try to be in front of you again. Sometimes it will be. When it is, there is no trick, only this. Keep moving. The loop likes patience. Don't loan it yours. And if the road says your name exactly right, don't give it the comfort of correcting its pronunciation. Keep both hands on the wheel. Remember the sign. Let the curve be a curve and not a commandment. Count to the far side. When you reach it, do not look in the rear view to check. The bend loves that. It loves to be believed. Let it wonder instead. Let it stand there in the rain with its bad mouth and patient friends and the yellow square waiting for someone who doesn't know better, and let it tell itself stories about you in which you were kinder than you had to be and still didn't stop. That's how you win on Harlow's Bend, not by defeating anything, but by refusing to audition for the part it's been saving for you since the first sign swayed and no wind moved it. Now on to the next story. I was the only one left on the platform when the station decided to remember me. Greystone is small as stations go, 2 tracks, a brick building with a slate roof that leaks in March, a clock that gains 3 minutes a week no matter what the handyman swears he did. After the last scheduled departure, 11:45 eastbound, the train people swear by and the rest of the town ignores. The platforms go to sleep like anything else. The vending machines hum. The pigeons find their beams. The clerk in the booth lowers the metal shutter with a finality that wants to be a kindness. I should have left when he did. My duffel was heavy with the life I couldn't afford, and I was tired in the way that feels like rust has decided it is you now. But I didn't have the money for a cab, and I didn't want to go back to the apartment whose walls had learned my fights. It was colder under the canopy than it should have been for October. The air had that metallic tang city nights get when rain has recently argued with stone. I kept my hands in my pockets so my fingers wouldn't remember what they were for. The station emptied by increments. A janitor pushed a yellow cart and did not meet my eye. A couple argued in low voices until their words frayed, and they went outside to finish doing that somewhere less acoustic. An old man slept with his head back and his mouth open until the guard shook him gently and pointed him toward the taxi rank. The clock read 12:03, then 12:11, then I stopped looking. The rails began to sing. You can feel trains before you see them if you give your attention to the right place. The metal takes the news first, and then the air. I felt the hum in my shoes, and then behind my ribs, the faintest pressure, like an elevator works on your organs. The light at the far end of the platform did not turn green. No announcement belled. No headlamp wrote a promise into the dark. A wind moved along the tracks. Not a gust, not weather, an exhale with a destination. It brought with it the smell of dry iron and something like water left too long in a flower vase. A shape detached itself from the night and became a train without the courtesy of headlights. It came in soft, as if it were trying not to wake anyone, as if stealth were kindness. The cars were old, not modern, sleek, but not the kind of venerable red you take your grandchildren to at the holiday festival either. Smooth-sided, windowed, forgettable, a stripe of paint along the middle that might have been blue or green in better light. It slowed at my portion of platform with the practiced efficiency of a habit. The doors sighed like tired lungs and parted. If you've never stepped into a room with the exact temperature of a morgue drawer, you don't know the kind of cold this was. Not winter cold, absence cold. What light there was came from nowhere, a grayness that should have had a source and did not. The aisle ran down the center of the car. Upholstered seats in pairs faced forward. The windows showed me my own uncertainty and a smear of my own breath. There were people sitting. That was the first relief. None of them moved. That was the second realization. I stood just inside the door with my duffel at my ankle and told myself I was going to step back out, wait on the platform for a train that had headlights like an honest machine. The doors snicked shut as if they were tired of hearing me lie to myself. The car jolted, the station slid away, the world beyond the windows forgot to exist. "Ticket," said a voice soft as paper. He sat near the door, the kind of man photographs in old books call a commuter, suit bagging a little at the knees, tie too narrow, hat in his lap with a sweatband gone dark. His eyes were open. They were not certain who they belonged to. His hand came up slow, palm out, a ritual more than a request. I dug for my wallet before it occurred to me that there would be no scanner here, no place to tap a phone or a card that is trying to be won. I missed the last one, I said. The clerk said. The farther end of the car answered, Leave him. A woman sat by the window 3 rows down. She had long black hair that looked like it had been brushed recently by hands that knew how, a dress that belonged to 3 styles ago, and none, and the kind of posture you hold when sitting has become a job. He's new, she added, as if that explained anything. The man with the hat sighed his breath out and folded his hand back into his lap. He did not blink. No one else did either, and that was the moment I placed the wrongness. The car was full of people who were not breathing like I was. The woman crooked 2 fingers. Sit, she said, before he comes. I have been told I obey too readily when instruction feels like a rope thrown into water. I sat opposite her because her eyes did not look like tacks. Up close I could see that her dress had been mended neatly at the seam under her arm. Her left knuckle had a white scar where a ring had once rubbed. The smell around her was citrus and old books, and a trace of something iron that had no right to be on anyone. What is this? I said. It came out small, a child trying not to wake someone. This is the last train, she said. It doesn't have a time printed. It has a tendency. Her mouth made that half smile a teacher makes when you get close to the answer and might need to own it yourself. I looked back at the door. It had forgotten how to open. The window showed only my face and a gray that could be fog or could be blank. They'll tell you you need a ticket, she said. If you have one, they take it. If you don't, they take what a ticket would be worth. What does that? The car shivered. Something tall moved at the far end without the insult of actually walking. You know the shape of authority, even when it is dressed in old cloth. Let's commit to that because something in me insisted wore a conductor's uniform, black enough to catch no light, with buttons that made small moons where brass decides not to die. The peaked cap was pulled low. The shadow where his face should have been felt like a place you could get lost in and never be offered a map. He went passenger by passenger, stopping with the courtesy of commerce. They held out their hands. He took something from each with a pinch, as if he were collecting coins you couldn't see. A young woman in a red coat sagged after he passed, and her red seemed older. An older man pressed his hand to his chest and then let it drop, as if the gesture didn't belong to him. The suit with the too narrow tie managed a small smile and then forgot he had. My chest tightened physically, as if the air had decided to become a hand. When the conductor reached our row and turned the blank where his face should be toward me, my name left my pockets. I felt it happen. The hook pulling, the slack, the loss. Not the syllables people say when they need you. The fact of the name, the way it anchors you to your bones. Ticket, said the absence. I don't. My voice was behind glass. He's new, the woman said. Her voice was low without pleading. He hasn't paid yet. The conductor's head turned toward her a fraction. There was a pressure shift, ears popping when you haven't climbed. The absence moved on, and the air remembered how to be shared. When I could, I looked at her. You know him. No one knows him, she said. He knows you. What does he take? She looked at my hands on the seat, at the whiteness of the knuckles I had not intended. Pieces, she said simply, small at first. What you think you can spare. The train didn't go past scenery so much as through possibility. Stations approached, platforms like sketches, lamps that made rings of light where a floor might be if someone funded it, and slid by without stopping. The doors sighed open at none of them and sighed closed again as if to stretch. At one, a child ran along the platform with something limp under her arm. At the next, the platform was a corridor, and the corridor was a throat, and I stopped trying to make sense of them in sequence. Where does it go? I asked. Down, she said, and when I looked at her in the way you look at someone who has chosen a metaphor, she added, away. The stops make you think you have a choice. Choice is part of the harm. What do I do? She stared at me for a long beat, and I had the thought, sudden and indecent, that she was beautiful, not for the symmetry of her features, but for the steadiness of someone who had been waiting a long time for the right stranger. You jump, she said, when it slows, before the doors, before he wants to ask again. And you, she smiled in a way that suggested all decisions had been tried. I got on before they put numbers on the trains to tell you where you were going. I'm not new. Some days I still remember what my apartment smelled like when the radiator had a good day. That's not enough to get off. What's your name? It was Clara, she said, and there was an ache in the past tense, shaped like a violin string pulled too far across its bridge. I keep it because they didn't take it the first time. I gave them other things I thought I could spare. He came again. I felt him before I saw him, the way you feel a deep bass note through drywall. He didn't look at me because I had only been taught once, and fairness is a thing even this service seems to respect. He looked at Clara. She held out her hand, and he pinched something from her palm with a delicacy that would have been tender if you didn't know it as theft. What was that? I asked when he had gone. The smell of the radiator, she said, very matter of fact, and I believed her. We passed a stop that had no platform, only a field of chairs arranged like a lecture. The chairs were full. The people in them looked up as we slid by, and their eyes did not change, and one of them had my boss's face at 30, and I hated the accuracy of it. How do you know when to jump? I asked. When you hate staying more than you fear falling, she said. For you, that will come quick. You brought no blankets. You could come with me. She shook her head. You don't start by being generous to me. You start by being selfish enough to live. The car shuddered. Ahead, a stop gathered shape, a platform with painted lines, a clock that could have been a twin to Greestone's if time had agreed to stay asleep, a rack of newspapers wrapped in string. The train slowed, not enough to be safe, enough to be wicked. Clara touched my wrist. Her hand was cool, not cold. Now, she said, the doors hissed to make you believe in them. I didn't use them. I shoved my duffel ahead and threw myself after it. The air hit back. My shoulder hit concrete and became the whole world for exactly one heartbeat. Then the rest of the pain argued loud enough to be listened to. I rolled away from the edge because the edge wants to see if you want to visit the underside of things. The platform was empty, no newspapers, no clock hands. Whatever the train had shown me to make the notion of landing less obscene evaporated as soon as it could stop behaving. I looked up. The train was gone, not receding, gone. The rails were two black snakes going their own ways. The electric hum of the station was wrong in the way a room feels when someone else has just left it. Stairs rose, concrete patched with gum and old moss. My hands shook so hard I could not trust them with my own pockets. When I stood, my knees tried to convince me they grasped prayer. I took the stairs. Greestone breathed again at the top, like a chest that has just decided there will be more of this. The clock said 12:07, which was a lie of one kind or another. The vending machines hummed their promise of sugar. The posters on the wall made perky suggestions about autumn weekend deals to towns I could never afford. There was a draft that had not been there earlier, a small ribbon of air that smelled like old citrus, and a radiator. My duffel had not made the jump as successfully as I had. It was no longer beside me. I reached to check my wallet and phone, and found absence where both used to live. Something in my chest went to one knee. I walked outside, and the town was the town. Street lamps wore their halos like saints who had stopped being for a moment. The bar at the corner had turned its chairs up on the tables and hosed a day down the drain. My apartment, if I went to it, would be 2 blocks east and 3 north, and there would be a note shoved under the knob because people who like order are very brave when it is late. I stood on the curb and stared down the street and listened to the night give advice and didn't take any of it. I did not see Clara again, not in the way that would have been clean, I saw her in other things. The way frost draws lace in a window and then forgets what it meant. The way the radiator hiccups at 3 in the morning like it is trying to laugh. The way my own name sometimes feels like a jacket I keep putting on backward until I spend a day getting it right. For a week, I did not sleep properly. The door to the bedroom remained open because the closed version felt like a train door learning my hinge. I covered the mirror with a towel and told myself I wasn't doing it for story reasons. Twice at 12:07 exactly, according to an untrustworthy clock, my radio clicked on by itself, and the volume knob turned one notch like a mouth practicing yes. The first time I unplugged it and put the plug on the windowsill where it could watch the rain. The second time I said quietly no to a room that smelled like old citrus and a radiator and the very faintest trace of iron. If this were a different sort of story, that would be that. I would have touched a door the world keeps for fools, and I would have learned. But people who have learned are extravagances this town rarely funds. So I went back to the station because there are habits that look like hope when you squint. Not the next night, not an invitation. A week later, when the cold had sharpened from suggestion to policy, I bought a coffee from the machine that tastes like burned promises and sat on the bench under the clock, and I watched the 11:45 go and the last janitor leave and the guard check the corners with his flashlight beam that knows more than he'll tell. When the platform was mine again, in that way silence sometimes hands you responsibility. You didn't ask to hold. I stood, and I waited for rails to sing. They did. The wind gathered itself and chose the low way along the track. The train slid in without apology. I told myself I would stay on the platform. There is a lot of telling yourself that happens around things like this. When the doors opened, the breath of the car had the smell that memory does when it tries to sneak in, wearing new clothes. The man with the too narrow tie did not look at me when I stepped in. The woman in the red coat had her forehead against the glass, like she was listening for someone who would never bother to knock. I walked down the aisle, and every person I passed felt like a word I had once known how to spell and now could only guess at. Clara sat where she had sat. She turned her head as if she had been saving that motion. Her mouth made the shape of my name, but decided not to get me used to the sound of it. I thought you got off for good, she said. I got off once, I said. That isn't the same. You're not supposed to come back. Neither are you, I said without meaning to be unkind. She smiled in that way that suggests the rule has been broken, and the rule does not care. He'll come, she said, and he did. The conductor's presence bent the aisle. He did not turn toward me immediately, and I understood this to be an acknowledgement that the game only works when the person playing thinks they have consented. He paused at the young man with an earring who had a finger resting on the edge of his seat, as if he had been about to stand and had been told not to. He took something invisible from the boy's palm. The earring dulled. When he reached us, he held out a gloved hand. Ticket, he said. I had brought something. It was stupid. It was also all I had. From my jacket pocket, I took a photograph of my mother at 17. Hair caught in a late summer wind, cigarette held away from her face, like she had been born elegant and only had to remember it. I had stolen the picture from one of the boxes my sister and I had labeled keep, because we knew better than to label anything else. I held the photograph up. He did not reach for it. He pressed 2 fingers to the air just above the image and pinched. It was not the picture he took. The paper remained against my skin. What left me was the smell of the day I had scanned it with my phone. My mother's laugh at the corner of my apartment that was always dusty, the taste of my coffee, the relief that a picture had stayed. I felt the empty place he left like the small ache where a tooth used to be. That's not a ticket, I said. His head tilted a fraction. The cap's shadow deepened. Everything is, he said, and went on. He can be refused, Clara said quietly, after the pressure lifted. That's the other harm. He can be refused only by refusing to pay a price you won't be able to live with if you do. What did you pay? I don't know anymore, she said. That was the first thing. The stops slid past, each an attempt at bribery in a new tone. A platform full of people holding out their hands with palms up as if they had the law on their side. A corridor of doors, each cracked just enough to show a sliver of light and a shadow passing. A field where a train could sit and wait for grass to learn patience. At one, a station that was exactly Greystone, except the clock read wrong, and the posters on the wall were the ones I had taken down 2 years ago, and the vending machine had a flavor of soda they stopped making when I was a child because it tasted like cough syrup and persistence. The train slowed so sweetly at that one, I could have stepped off without learning anything painful about gravity. I could get off here, I said. I could go upstairs and find a different version of my apartment, where we never had the fight, and the letter never came, and the clerk at the booth doesn't know me, and it would keep long enough for me to believe in it. That's one of them, she said. I used to have a stop where the music from the bar on the corner was always the song I loved in May and never heard again. He found it for me. He finds them for you. That's how he gets you to pay twice. What happens if I stay? You become the kind of person who calls it a bargain. She stood then, suddenly, as if her body had moved before she felt like humoring it. The door at the far end of the car had opened on its own, and beyond it I saw a short vestibule and then another car, and in that car I saw people standing, not sitting. The light was different there, warmer, almost honest, and the air changed, as if something in me believed dawn had been invented again. You should leave, she said. I can't do it with you. It has to be your fear. And you. I make other people leave, she said, with a shrug, almost proud. Everyone needs a job. We went to the vestibule. The train slowed as it slid past a station with a name I recognized and had never visited, a name from a childhood map where the letters meant far. The doors hissed. We didn't use them. We stepped between cars. The second carriage had a bar at one end. You could lean your elbows and pretend a drink had been poured for you if you wanted your mouth tricked. A man stood there with a napkin under his glass and said to no one, "Cheers," and the conductor appeared next to him like an option and pinched something you couldn't see from his fingers. I wanted to pretend the thing he took was the taste of the drink. The window in this car showed me a different outside. Not stations, not platforms. A city I knew and did not. Streets ghosted by light like web, windows lit and then unlit in no sequence I could claim, bridges drawing lines under lines. My heart did the small double beat it does when the plane dips, and the pilot speaks to prove the plane is paying attention. "Jump," Clara whispered. It wasn't advice, it was the only grammar we had left. I didn't. I walked to the bar as if the man pouring could offer me an argument. Behind the counter, a shelf of bottles held labels in fonts that had not existed yet. One label had my father's handwriting on it. I reached and my fingers met glass that was cooler than anything has the right to be. "Don't buy from him," Clara said, "even if the drink is yours." "Do you ever get to drink again?" I asked, and the laugh she made was exactly human. The conductor turned toward us, and the air thickened, and I chose fear because it was the only thing I owned that still behaved. When the train leaned into something like a curve, and the bodies in the car inclined together as if choreographed, I put my hand flat on the bar, and then on the edge of the doorway, and then into the dark between cars, and used that grip to trust that falling is a fact, not a suggestion. Clara didn't move. She stood where I had stood a week ago, posture like a job. "Go," she said. It had the sound of a word she practiced and liked for the shape it gave her mouth. The jump hurt less this time, because the first time had taught me what stupidity feels like in your shoulder. I hit the platform, rolled, swore, laughed once without wanting to, and lay with my spine against concrete, and watched the underside of the canopy above me, pretend it had never met rain. When I looked down the tracks, there was only track. At the top of the stairs, Greystone was itself enough to forgive me. The clock read 12:07 with the stubbornness of the obtuse. I walked outside, and the air had warmed the way it does when stories are not doing the breathing for you. I went home. I made the kind of coffee you make when you're trying not to wake yourself up. I took my radio and put it in a cupboard and closed the cupboard and put the kettle on top of the cupboard, because petty victories are real. Then I took the photograph of my mother into the kitchen light. The paper was the same. The face was the same. I could see the corner of her mouth where cigarette met the joke. When I held it to my nose, I smelled nothing. It broke me in a way a poem would approve of, and I did not let it. That week I looked for tickets, not the paper kind, the other kind, things I could be tricked into thinking I could spare. I found a shoebox of letters and put them back. I found the sweater my ex left and put it in a bag for the thrift store because leaving it in the drawer had become an altar. I found the eviction notice and folded it into a paper plane and threw it at the ceiling until it lodged in the fan, and then I stood on a chair and took it down and burned it in a pie tin. Fire is the only punchline I trust. Sometimes now, at night, the rails hum under the city like a thought you are trying not to have. I take long ways home. I look at station clocks and the minute hands give me back the correct time, which is a gift I didn't know you could negotiate for. When the wind takes the low way along the track, I do not wait for doors. I see Clara in other places, a woman on a bus with a scar where a ring once rubbed, a figure in a laundromat who folds with the care of someone whose hands remember something and refuse to forget it, a reflection in a shop window that makes a mouth against the glass and then doesn't bother to fog it. Once, on a Sunday morning that felt like mercy, I felt the exact temperature of her hand on my wrist as I stepped too close to the edge of a subway platform, and I stepped back and said thank you to no name. If you ask me what the last train wants, I will tell you this: it wants rent. For each time you say aloud that a place has let you down, it offers you a car that can carry you farther from the responsibility of being person-shaped in a world that will make you sit and wait and think you should be grateful. It takes small pieces first: the smell of a radiator, the taste of a drink, the name of a day. It will let you leave if you are willing to jump while it is still pretending to be gentle. Some nights I hear the ticket office shutter slide down in my dreams. Some nights a voice says ticket very softly from the cupboard where the radio lives, and I get up and put the kettle back on top of the door like I am a person who knows how to keep himself. On the worst nights, the conductor walks down the aisle of my ribcage and pinches something I can't name out of the palm of a heart that has already done its work. I wake with my hands open and count to a number that used to mean stairs in the house where I learned to be tall. If you find yourself on the platform after midnight and the rails begin to remember their purpose, listen to the advice that comes through a static you don't deserve. It won't always be mine. It won't always be kind. Jump before the doors open. Refuse to get good at paying. If you carry a photograph, put it in your shoe where no one can reach it without making you dance. And if you meet a woman with long black hair who sits as if sitting paid her rent, and she tells you her name was Clara in a tense that means once and maybe again, do what she says the first time. She has work to do. So do you. The world above the stairs is not much, but it's ours, and the radiators, when they are good, still make a sound that with practice you can keep. Now on to the next story. My grandfather used to pull the curtains at dusk like he was tucking the whole house into bed. He'd lick his thumb and pinch the pull cord, 2 quick tugs, and the fabric would hush down. No need to see what doesn't mean you well, he'd say without looking at me. The first time I asked what that meant, he told me the woods behind town weren't empty, not haunted, not sacred, just occupied. I laughed when I was small because words like that rolled off me. I didn't laugh at 17. At 17, you're too busy proving you're not afraid of anything to admit you aren't sure what fear is for. We called the stretch of old growth on the far side of the quarry the Hollow, though there's no map that says that. The main trail is wide enough for a four-wheeler and ends at a ramshackle hunting cabin. Teenagers swear has a secret basement. There are side paths, deer tracks, old logger cuts that lead nowhere and everywhere. You can walk there in daylight and feel like you've stepped into the wrong year. You can stand at the tree line at night and hear nothing at all. That kind of silence isn't peace, it's attention. The dare started at a bonfire nobody had permission for. Tyler Boone brought a truck bed of pallets and a case of beer he didn't pay for, and enough gasoline to make the flames think we liked them. Every kid in school showed up in thrifted flannel and a scent that said it would be fine to regret this tomorrow. People kissed people they shouldn't. The smoke got in your hair the way trouble gets in your plans. Somebody put a speaker in a cooler and the music sounded like it was drowning. I was on my second beer, warm and tinny, when Tyler's laugh came from my left like a slap. "Mason," he yelled, because he liked yelling my name more than using it properly. "You still scared of the Hollow?" He had that look that meant he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted, or the night ran out of him. His friends leaned behind him like a set of choices I would regret either way. "It's just trees," I said. I wanted it to be a sentence that ended the conversation. It came out like a dare I had accidentally made to myself. "Then midnight hike," he said, almost kindly. "In and out before dawn. None of that I got lost crap. You go to the cabin, leave your mark, you come back, we'll keep the fire for you. Or admit you're chicken, and I'll stop asking you to do anything brave forever." He would not stop asking. If I said no, he'd carry that refusal like a trophy and show it to every stranger he could. If I said yes, the forest would accept my answer too. 17 doesn't model outcomes. 17 is a closed fist. "Fine," I said, and to my disgust, the cheers around us felt like a reward. "Bring him back a souvenir," someone added. "Bring a nail from the cabin." Somebody else shouted for me to take pictures. The night blinked slow. Tyler clapped my shoulder hard enough to make the bottle rattle in my hand. "We'll wait," he said, and if I had been a different person, I would have noticed he didn't say "we'll help." There are different kinds of dark. There's the kind that collects under porches and inside tires, the kind that belongs to a neighborhood and minds its business. There's the kind that falls like a curtain, heavy and respectful, when the sky is clear in October. And then there's the kind the Hollow keeps on hand, a dark like a closed mouth. The trail swallowed my light, as if it were embarrassed for me. The pine needles underfoot gave without sound. I told myself every step that the woods were only trees at night, that the shapes my beam found were shapes I'd see in daylight and call by their names. The smell went wrong around the first bend. Damp and leaf sour is normal. Damp and something metallic and sweet is not. It caught behind my teeth and made my tongue feel heavy. I slowed without meaning to. My light found a trunk taller than the rest, a lightning strike down its center, years old and still raw looking. Someone, many someones, had carved into the bark, spirals that didn't quite close, hash marks intersecting lines that tried to be letters, and quit. Sap had bled from the cuts and run in black gloss that made my light behave. I touched one groove with 2 fingers because you can't help yourself around stories. The wood was warm like a human wrist. The crack behind me wasn't a twig snapping, it was the sound of pressure releasing. I spun with my light and found nothing but underbrush. But the leaves at shoulder height trembled the way a person does when they are trying not to cough. I told myself it was a raccoon. I told myself a lot of things that did not want me. The cabin showed up fast because the trail decided to be helpful. It sat in a small clearing like a tooth set wrong in a jaw. The roof bowed under moss and weather. The windows were rectangles of absence. Someone had hung a sign there once. The last 2 letters remained, a nailed-on IN, that could have been an invitation or a warning. My light cut a square through dust and found nothing first, and then too much. The smell hit my mouth. Rot, certainly. Under that iron, under that something like rain that has been waiting too long to fall. I stepped through the doorway because the night had left me no other door to argue with. The floor flexed. Carvings scored every log. The spirals and hash marks from the tree had been repeated here with a patience that wanted to be called worship. Some lines were new, bright, with resin still weeping. Some were old and dark and boarded over by newer cuts. The patterns didn't arrange themselves into anything you could be proud of deciphering. They wanted to be looked at long enough that looking became agreeing. At the far end, bolted to the floor, was a chair. You know the difference between a chair and a device, by the way. Your knees react. This had arms too tight and straps too worn and a back too tall. The wood around its feet had been darkened by something that wasn't varnish. There were scratches on the arms, shallow at first, deeper as you followed them, stopping in sudden gouges like someone had tried to argue with their own hands and lost. My light guttered. The batteries were new. My thumb tapped the casing anyway. The cone of light widened and thinned. My breath fogged in front of my face, in a space that was not cold enough for fog. I thought I heard a sound loud enough to name, and then the thought left me, as if a hand had gone into a drawer and removed it. When the whisper arrived, it didn't use ears. It squeezed from the inside of my skull. Stay. I didn't move. That was all I had to offer. If I moved, it would be me deciding. If I didn't, the cabin had to claim me itself. Hungry, said the pressure. The way you say please after you've been taught it stops being optional. The air thickened, a heavy cloth, damp and patient. The chair seemed to tilt, though it didn't. The straps dangled like lines offered to a drowning man. My light took its own advice and cut itself. The dark in the cabin was the wrong kind. It wanted things. Stay. We're hungry. I left my dignity in the threshold. I bolted, hitting the door frame with my shoulder, an old bruise planted like a flag. The night outside had the decency to be air, and when I gulped it, I thought I could taste dust and books and the kind of sunlight that makes you squint. My legs happened without me. Branches reached and found my jacket and wrote new shapes into it. The whisper followed, not in my head now, in my teeth. The vibration made my jaw ache. Don't leave. Don't run. You came to feed us. There is a point at which fear becomes work. You do what you have to. I kept the beam low to find roots and holes. I put one foot down and then the other like I had invented it. The trail split where it usually doesn't. I guessed wrong and found a ditch and ate a mouthful of leaf mold and old acorns. When I lifted my head, 3 figures stood where the light thought the path had been. They were not ghosts in any capital letter sense. They were bodies that had decided to keep being without remembering how. Tall, even with a stoop, draped in rags that had never been new. Their chests were patterned with cuts, spirals, crosshatches, still seeping with something dark and thick. Their faces didn't match faces as we used them. Features set too far apart, skin stretched wrong. Their mouths were large and all the wrong shapes. The eyes, what sat in the sockets, were not eyes. They were hollows, deep enough that what light I had seemed to go down and not come back. Hunger, said one, and the sound came from the opening that might have been a mouth, and from the ground under my hands, and from behind the trees in a harmonized insistence. The one to the left tilted its head the way a dog does when you've said something large and strange. The one to the right took a half step in unison with the others, as if the idea of movement were being shared among them like a song. My light, traitorous, tried to shake itself out of my hand. I scrambled backward, scuffing the wet earth with my heels. The whittled grooves in their skin caught the light like script. I had the stupid thought that they had tried to write something on themselves so the woods would remember their names. They were close enough that the wrong cold of them had a scent, wet wool and old pennies. I was not noble. I did not plan. The body wants up more than it wants any story about up. I ran again, cutting into brush too thick for paths and too honest for lies. The whisper thickened. It suggested a price and then another. The woods played fair by not lying about it. Bring another, and we let you go. I nearly fell off the ridge instead of finding it. One more step in the dark, and I would have introduced my bones to the ravine the way teenagers dare each other to. The slope dropped away in a black that did not reflect. Past it, over the shoulder of land, the town made a small, diligent glow. 3 street lamps and the gas station, and the window of the diner that pretends not to close. A dog barked, a sound so domestic it hurt. My thigh muscles told me they had their own ideas about the future. I went sideways along the ridge with both hands out, the way you do on ice. The whisper pressed. Another. Give us another. We let you go. The names that came into my head weren't random. Tyler raised himself from my memory, laughing with his hand on my shoulder like it was his. The boys who laughed with him, and the girls who chose not to look at me unless they could make a friend angry by it. All of them lined up like charitable donations. They're the easy thoughts. They humiliate you afterwards because you find you had them. No, I said to the dirt and the press of hunger, and to whatever had stolen good sense from my hands in the cabin. My voice sounded thin and young. The trees to my right shuddered like someone had dragged a coat through them. A pressure rose in the ground that felt like a held breath becoming the need for speech. The air kept its hands on my shoulders and tried to turn me the way you turn a child who is looking the wrong way. No, I said again. I don't know why I said it twice. Maybe because words repeated become doors. The woods answered the way they know how. The trunks leaned and then leaned back, not by much, by the width of a promise. The wind ran in and ran out again, like it had forgotten something. The whisper retreated into the roots and the layers of leaves. All that remained was the quiet that comes right before dawn, when even tired birds can't be bothered to complain. I did not feel like I had won anything. I felt like I had been allowed to take responsibility for my choice, and that I would be required to do it again. The tray line spits you back into town, the way a bad conversation does, abruptly, without apology, with bits of someone else still clinging to you, gravel underfoot. The single bulb on the pole behind the ball field insists on its job. The houses along that side street all share a porch light syndrome. On, off, on. I crossed the last patch of ditch and saw Sheriff Langley's cruiser roll slow by the diner, the way it always does when he can't sleep and pretends it's work. He saw me. He did not flash his lights or hit the siren. He pulled over where my path met the asphalt, and he left his window up and watched me walk to him. Evening, he said. It was morning. Evening, I said back. I was bleeding from the sleeve and did not care yet. I must have looked like the wrong answer to a question nobody had asked. Been in the hollow, he said, not asking. Yes, I said. It was either that or lie, and my mouth had no energy for anything with extra steps. He nodded once, as if I'd passed a test he did not approve of giving. Get home, he said. Clean up, eat something hot. Then he looked at my face the way people look at weather, and added, don't make any offerings for a bit. He meant don't leave food on your windowsill, don't put salt across your door, don't hang twine with knots in it from your porch. The old people do those things in spring and in November, and when a baby comes, the old people are not wrong. But when you've been in, and the hollow has let you go, the woods respect other currencies. If you try to buy your way out again with rituals, you will feel the dark turn and weigh you for scales. I nodded because I understood him, and he gave me the courtesy of not driving me home. The hollow dislikes kindness when it's not invited to participate. My grandfather didn't lecture. He saw my jeans, shredded above the knee. He saw the sap and the mud, and the marks on my forearms, that would be purple by noon. He put the kettle on the stove and put the blue wash basin on the counter and set a clean towel beside it. He went to the bedroom and came back with an old jar of salve that smelled like pine and wintergreen and something older than both. He worked without talking, the way men of his generation do when they want to be certain you will hear them later. When the tea was cool enough to swallow, he said, "Well then," and I said yes, and that was the end of the first conversation. Sleep that day was a collection of small broken plates. I set them down, one at a time, and each one cut me. If I dreamed, the dream was made of pine pitch and the thump of something heavy against old floorboards. When I woke, it was because the house had settled, the way houses do, and I'd mistaken it for a footstep. The bonfire wasn't there when I went past the field that afternoon. The grass was bristled with black scars where pallets had been. The cooler lay on its side, and the speaker was gone, as if it had learned shame. At school on Monday, Tyler did not ask about my hike. He looked at me once, a quick assessment you give to things that might break or might break you, and then decided he had other stories to tell. He laughed at lunch, and when he laughed, the hair on my arms tried to stand. I kept my sandwich in my hands until I remembered how to make my fingers believe bread had ever been safe. The hollow did not let me go. In daylight, nothing was different. The old woman who sells bait and bread at the gas station still weighed my gummy worms on the spring scale and called me sweetie. Mr. Patel at the hardware store still kept the nails I like in brown paper bags under the counter, so I'd have an excuse to talk to him about his daughter's scholarship. The quarry still reflected sky better than lakes do, but night changed shape. Night learned my name, the way the conductor on a train learns the regulars. From my bed, if I held my breath the right way, I could hear a hush that wasn't the refrigerator or the house or my lungs. It was listening all the way outdoors. It was the hollow deciding whether to ask politely. Sometimes it asked. A week later, just before dawn made the sky admit it owed me light, a whisper slid up through the floorboards under my bed and brought the smell of rain waiting in bark. "Stay," it said, a suggestion, like a friend asking you to be late to school with them. "Feed us." It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like weather. I turned my face to the wall because my grandfather had taught me not to look at a thing that wanted my agreement. The whisper went away as easily as fog leaves glass when you put your hand on it. Sometimes it didn't ask. Twice in November, something knocked at the back door that wasn't Knuckles. Once the kitchen window fogged from the outside, and words wrote themselves in, letters too careful, "Come back." I wiped it with the heel of my hand. Pale grease from my palm made streaks I had to scrub later. The streaks smelled like sap. I told the sink I was tired of being polite to things that had not learned to be. The sheriff's advice held. Offerings would have been a language the hollow could pretend to misunderstand. So I did the other kind of ritual. I ate food with salt. I kept a nail in my pocket and a stone I'd warmed by the stove on my nightstand. I put my boots beside the bed, pointing toe out, so that if I had to move fast, I wouldn't put them on backwards, because fear makes fools, and fools run in dumb circles. I did not sit with my back to the window. I answered my grandfather when he spoke and made a point of saying his name because names keep people where they should be. Tyler didn't stop being Tyler. That's the trouble with boys like him. They don't know when they've been spared. They went to the hollow again 2 Fridays after my hike and came back smelling like lies. In third period on Monday, when the math teacher stepped out, he told a story about a raccoon and a bottle of cheap whiskey, and I watched the faces around me do the thing people do when they are relieved that danger can be made small and stupid with the right verbs. At lunch, he dared Jalen to go alone, and then when Jalen said nothing, he turned his head and found me with his mouth. "You've been," he said. "Tell him it's nothing." "It's not nothing," I said, and after I said it, There was a silence I could put my fist in. It lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Tyler grinned. "See?" he told the table. "He's messing with you. He went that night anyway. Not alone. People like him don't enjoy their own company. He took 2 boys who wanted a story they could tell forever, and a girl who wanted to make somebody jealous, and a flashlight that worked until it didn't. I know because I followed them as far as the tree line, and then stopped where my grandfather's words became a hand at my collar. I watched their lights move like minnows in shallow water. I counted to 31, the number of boards on the bridge over the creek, the number of steps from our back door to the road, because numbers are a way of reminding yourself that some rules are made by you. The hollow took nothing that night. It let them laugh. It let them throw a bottle at a tree. It let them carve something ugly on the door of the cabin and leave the cheap Sharpie there like an apology. Then it sent them out with the feeling that they had been the cruelest people in the room and that the room had not minded. That's how it keeps you. It's patient as rust. It doesn't need to get lucky. It only needs you to get tired. The week before Thanksgiving, the town hung lights on Main Street, and the bakery put gingerbread in the window, and Sheriff Langley pulled me over on purpose to tell me the quarry road would be closed after dark. "Brakes freeze," he said to the air between us. "People forget how to use respect." He looked at my hands on the steering wheel and nodded, approving or not, I couldn't tell. Then he said, "You hearing anything at night?" And I said, "Sometimes." And he said, "Don't repeat it when you do." And we let that be prayer. The hollow changed the way I heard my grandfather breathe. He kept the curtains shut all the way down now, and put coins on the windowsill, so that if anything pressed for entry, it would have to make a choice first. He didn't teach me which prayers he knew. He taught me the way to hold a door with your shoulder while your hands are full, so that the house learns you are willing to work. He taught me that when the kettle whistles, you take it off, even if you have to set it on the floor, because letting anything scream in a kitchen is an invitation to the wrong kind of visitor. On the coldest night of the year so far, when the breath in the barn looked like smoke and the cow's eyes made moons in the dark, I woke to a voice that had given up on whispering. "Hungry," said the floorboards. The window, my pillow. "Hungry," said the air. It wasn't asking for me. It was insisting on itself. I sat up slow because moving badly makes everything worse. The house was a person who had turned over in bed and not decided to get up. I thought of my grandfather's heartbeat next door, and of Tyler's laugh in the woods, and of the chair bolted to the floor, and of the spirals carved in bark and skin, and of the way the town lights look when you are almost home. I thought of my own mouth saying no, and of the way no had opened a door that did not lead where I wanted. "You can be hungry," I said into the room. "I can't feed you." It sounded stupid. It sounded brave. It felt like sand in my throat. "If you want me, you'll have to come here and tell me your name." The dark moved like it had misheard me. Then it left. I lay back down and stared at the line where the curtain didn't meet the wall because curtains never do. From somewhere at the edge of the field came the sound of something big, moving carefully. The cows did not complain. It took a long time for sleep to come, and when it did, it came like a truck from the wrong direction. In the morning there were prints in the thin frost between the porch and the old apple tree. Not prints like boots, not prints like deer. Long, narrow, the suggestion of toes but not the commitment, as if the feet that had made them had decided to keep some of their options. I stood over them with a mug of coffee too hot to drink and counted them backward until they reached the road and then stopped. The sheriff's cruiser rolled by, and Sheriff Langley slowed without seeming to. He looked at the tracks. He raised his eyebrows at me. Then he tipped his chin toward the tray line and drove on, because some conversations are best had at a distance. You want me to say I went back to the cabin and dug up the floor and solved something, or that I lured Tyler there and delivered him to whatever lives under bark until I felt righteous? or that I learned the woods have a king, and that if you cut a crown from his skull, the town will be safe for 100 years. It makes me a bad storyteller to tell you I did none of that. I carried a nail in my pocket and a rock on my table. I learned to hear when the hollow was asking and when it had decided to take. I said no, often enough that the word stopped tasting like fear and started tasting like bread. When spring came, my grandfather put seeds in the ground with the care of a man who knows plants are the other way the world bargains. Tyler left town for the oil fields and came back once in July for a funeral and left again without hugging his mother. The sheriff lost weight, and we pretended not to notice because we did not want to be the kind of town that takes more than it's owed. The cabin sat with its carvings and its straps and its chair, and I, who had learned to listen, could hear people laughing there and pretending it was clever. I still hear the hollow when the house goes quiet. It has learned my name the way I have learned to keep it. Some nights I lie awake and it places the idea of Tyler on my tongue like a communion I have not asked for. Some nights it says hungry and means something that isn't me at all. Some nights the whisper is almost a song, almost kind, almost the opposite of loneliness. Those are the nights that are hardest to refuse because hunger is more bribe than threat when you share it. If I am still telling this when I am my grandfather's age, I'll pull the curtains at dusk and say no need to see what doesn't mean you well, and the child who hears me will laugh because words like that roll off small shoulders. When they turn 17, they'll stop laughing and they'll go into the hollow because somebody will make a dare or because nobody will, and that's worse. Maybe they'll sit in the chair, and maybe the chair will sit in them. Maybe they'll come back to the edge of the field before dawn and stand there shaking while the town makes its small, diligent glow. Maybe they'll hear the bargain and accept it and bring another, and then it will be my turn to say a name I don't want to say to a darkness that doesn't deserve it. Or maybe they'll say no twice and mean it, and the woods will lean back a fraction, and the dog 2 streets over will bark once like a punctuation mark and fall quiet, and the sheriff will drive by without stopping, and I'll make tea without letting the kettle scream. I can't tell you the ending because the hollow refuses endings. It runs on the kind of time that eats clocks. The best I can give you is this. There are nights I wake and the house has become a throat and something is speaking through it, and I put my hand flat on the wall and say my own name like a tool I trust, and somewhere in the trees something thinks about arguing and doesn't. There are mornings when the frost holds prints that decide to stop before the road. There are afternoons when the wind moves through pine, like the sound of someone choosing to leave. If you live here long enough, you learn the things that borrowed you, your temper, your pride, your worst idea of justice. You learn to put them down on the porch and go inside and pull the curtains and sit in a chair that is only a chair. You learn to eat hot food. You learn to be poor in the right ways. You learn the word no so well it starts to sound like yes to the people who want it to. And when the hollow presses its face to the window and breathes the word hungry, you answer like you would to weather. You say quietly, I heard you. Then you go on washing your hands, and when the water runs cold, you turn the tap the other way, and you don't look up to see your reflection blink first. Now, on to the next story. They say the ocean keeps secrets better than the earth does. The woods may swallow you, the desert may bleach you, but the sea erases you. Salt water scrapes the memory off bones. Currents scatter you until you belong everywhere and nowhere. My father used to say, that's why sailors are more superstitious than most. They know too well how small they are against the tide and how patient the tide can be. Breaker's Point isn't much more than a crooked street and a harbor that looks larger at low tide than it truly is. In the mornings, old men sit on plastic chairs outside the bait shop, pretending to argue about weather they've already memorized. In the evenings, the lighthouse sweeps its regular blessing over water that declines to be blessed. I had grown up 200 miles inland, where rivers mind their banks, and the horizon is a fence of hills. Breakers was a postcard to me at first, then a job, then a mouth that wouldn't stop whispering in mine. I signed on with Captain Rourke late in September, when night starts to think about coming earlier and the wind learns new edges. I was 22 with a duffel bag and no plan that could be written on paper. The captain took one look at my hands and decided I knew how to work, which was kinder than deciding I knew anything else. You haul, you scrub, you keep shut unless spoken to, he said. You don't whistle on deck, you don't name the thing that takes fish when it wants to, and you don't ever toss bread to gulls. He spoke in rules the way priests do, fast enough that you don't mistake them for suggestions. We went out on the Mabu, a boat with paint like old lipstick, and a deck that knew all the words for grown. The crew was Rourke, a pair of brothers with faces weathered into one expression, a mechanic named Jules, whose tattoos looked like they had been done by a man who knew prison, and me. We cast off at twilight. The lighthouse flashed. 2 beats, a pause, a third, and the last of the land slid left and then away, and the sound the hull made changed from talking to thinking. I had thought I understood loneliness, raised as I was under big sky, but there is a kind of loneliness out there that comes from looking in every direction and finding only distance. The first hours were work, and the quiet that follows it. Jules handed me a coil of rope and said, "Tie like it's the last knot anyone will see of you." One of the brothers checked the winch with a tenderness he probably didn't show to people. Rourke sat at the helm with a cigarette he never lit, staring forward as if keeping an appointment with the dark. I learned to walk with my knees soft and my hands out, learned where to put a bucket so it wouldn't go skating, learned there is such a thing as a kind wave and that it has twins. We dropped nets in water the color of bruised fruit. The line took the weight the way a patient does. First a reluctance, then a decision. I expected the pull that means fish are writing their names for you below. Instead, the net went slack, then taut, then slack again, a heartbeat that did not belong to us. One of the brothers muttered something in a language the sea likes. The other answered without moving his mouth. "Bottom's wrong here," he said softly. "Shut it," Rourke snapped, not because he thought the man was lying, but because you do not say true things out loud when the water can hear you. When we hauled the first net up, it was not empty, but it did not make sense. The mesh had been rubbed raw, strands frayed like hair after fire. Knotted through it were lengths of pale material, almost transparent, that held the light like jelly holds a rumor. I touched one without thinking and felt the resistance of tendon, not plant. Jules held it up to the deck lamp. It glowed very faintly, as if it had known the moon for a long time and missed it. "What the hell is that?" I asked because not asking would have been worse. Rourke took the strand from Jules like he was taking a cigarette from a man who did not need to be smoking. He stuffed it into a canvas sack and didn't answer. "Drop again," he said. His voice tried to be casual and could not. The second haul came up with more of the pale lengths and a smell that had to be fought to be believed. Sweet, metallic, rotted seaweed, and pennies in rain. The brothers crossed themselves and then pretended they hadn't. Jules worked the winch with hands that wanted to be elsewhere. I swallowed hard and tasted iron. The night wind came colder and sharper, and then dropped its voice to pretend it had not been speaking. Around 3, fog found us. I have seen fog roll in across fields like a bad idea, and I have seen fog sit on lakes like a hen. This was neither. This came as a wall with a door that had chosen us. One moment the horizon was an honest line. The next we were inside something that wanted to be a room. The deck lights cut only a thin circle and seemed ashamed of it. The engine sounded muffled, as if wrapped in cotton. Somewhere in that gray, a gull laughed twice and thought better of it. "Kill the motor," Rourke said. Jules looked at him like a man looks at his doctor right before anesthesia. Rourke didn't raise his voice, Just used it the way you use a knife you have sharpened yourself. Kill it. The engine died. The sound it took with it was bigger than the noise it made. The boat drifted and remembered how to creak. We sat with fog pressing all windows. I rubbed my arms inside the slicker because I had not learned how to be salt yet. The brothers checked nothing and pretended it was something. I had the sense that the fog was close, not just around us, but under us, replacing water with the idea of it. And then we heard it. Sound moves differently on water. It does not just come into ears. It comes up through wood and skin and bone. This came through the hull first, a low note like a church organ mourning below human hearing, a tone so stretched it invented a new verb, to lengthen and then lengthen further. The rails shook their heads, the poor screws shivered, the air hummed. The note swelled until it had a texture, and the texture suggested syllables that refused to line up. "What is that?" I said because my throat wanted to. Rourke cut me a look that told me I had stepped onto a staircase that did not currently exist. "Don't answer it," he said. He spoke to a frequency, not to me. The sound came again and closer. It had learned where to put itself in our teeth. The brothers clutched their charms the way frightened people clutch their competitors' hands in a foot race. Jules gripped the rail and whispered no in a cadence that wanted to be yes. On the third note, the fog shifted, as if something large had moved just beyond the ring of our little courage. A shape surfaced. I saw it between curtains of gray, a pale arc like the back of a creature that had been smoothed by centuries and then carved with care. It did not break the sea rudely. It did not make the splash that would have been mercy. It rose as if air were in agreement. Tendrils, or something that would be called tendrils by a mouth that needed words, trailed from it, each lined with bright points that pulsed once like breathing and then did not. The part I could call a head had eyes arranged in rings, each ring blinking on its own time, and a circular mouth too slow to be hunger and too regular to be speech. The sound it made thickened. It wasn't language, not the way we do it. It found thoughts that would hold it and poured itself there. It asked without asking. It suggested answers in the comfort of not having to find them yourself. Beside me, one of the brothers leaned forward and shouted an answer back. Not English, not any tongue a map uses, something his grandmother might have liked and hated him for. He didn't finish. He made a small sound like a child refusing medicine, then fell backward, his body bucking as if the deck had decided to be electricity. Foam threaded from his mouth. Blood crept from his ears as if it were remembering where to go. His brother grabbed him and held him and prayed backward through words he had not used since he was 9. The convulsions stopped the way storms do, without apology. The eyes opened and did not look. The mouth calmed and did not shut. He was suddenly a body. The thing sank with the grace of a sentence ending. The water smoothed itself, like a person smoothing hair after a mistake. The fog drifted back together and decided we were decoration. No one spoke. What language would have wanted us? We buried the brother because the boat could not carry him. That is what Rourke said. She can't carry him. He did not say the ocean asks for what it has started. We wrapped him in oilcloth because that was what we had. His living brother stood so still, I thought he might topple by accident. We slid the dead weight into black that did not accept but consumed. For a breath the shape held under the surface, like a memory of itself. Then bubbles came up like a lie, and he was gone. We did not start the engine again. The fog stayed. The note returned at intervals that were regular only to themselves. Every time it came, something in my head pressed against something else, as if trying to make a door. I tried to block my ears with my fingers, then with cloth, then with prayer, then with cursing. None of it kept the sound out. This did not travel through air. This used me. By noon, Jules had stopped talking and started rocking. By afternoon, the surviving brother had tied and untied knots until his palms bled, and then used the blood to make certain marks on the deck, which he wiped away almost immediately, as if ashamed to be seen bargaining. Rourke held the wheel, not because there was direction to be had, but because there are men who cannot think without anchoring their hands to work. He muttered coordinates that did not exist, as if he could shame the maps into forgiving him. I watched the fog and thought of my father's voice telling me to never spit into the wind and to never think a calm sea liked me. I spoke to no one because my mouth felt like a door too. At dusk, the note came and held, and under it a structure of syllables settled more clearly. It was as if someone in the next room were speaking words I could almost catch, if only I leaned further into a wall. I leaned and felt the hull lean back. The creature rose again, nearer. Its tendrils brushed the water with the intoxication of attention. The eyes on the outer ring blinked in a slow circle. The inner ring blinked in the opposite direction. The mouth chewed nothing and made me think of gears. It gave me pictures, not of it, but of places it knew. Valleys under the sea, tubed with bones the size of bridges. Cities made of arcs and spires that had no right angles. Doors that were holes in the water, where another kind of water waited and reached a hand out to be tried. Rooms of pressure, rooms of silence, rooms where sound does not bounce off anything because it has been trained to stay. The pictures did not enter my eyes. They turned on in my head like lanterns in rooms I did not know I had rented. "I'm thirsty," I said to no one, because my tongue had decided to be a stone. The tank water smelled of iron. When I lifted a cup to my lips, it tasted like pennies that had been kept in a pocket with guilt. I wanted to drink from the sea, and that knowledge made me set the cup down and curse at it. Night brought stars I could not see, and wind I could not feel, and then wind I could with teeth. Sometime after midnight, Jules stood. He moved like a man in a dream who has been given instructions. His eyes shone like something behind them had found a light. "It wants me," he said in a voice that had not been his. "It wants me, and I want it." "Don't," Rourke said, and put every prayer he had ever refused into the word. Jules smiled as if he had just been told a good joke. He climbed the rail in 2 practiced motions and leaned as if kissing. His body met the water with no splash because the tendrils came up to greet him, and there is a courtesy among predators. They wrapped him with the tenderness that befits a gift you had not expected to receive. He did not scream. He looked up, met my eyes, and smiled again as the ring of teeth learned him. Then he left us. I wish I could tell you the fog lifted then, and we turned for home, humbled and relieved and frightened into goodness. The fog stayed. The note stayed. The boat drifted in a circle we could not feel and would not test. The surviving brother held his hands in front of his face and did not put them down. I sat on a coil of rope and told myself the names of the streets in my inland town until they stopped sounding like places. When I slept, it was for seconds. In those seconds, I was not on water. I was under it, in a room that understood me far too well. On the second night, the creature came closer. I saw details I wanted to deny to my own memory. Beneath the pale surface, layers beneath layers, movement beneath movement, a logic. The tendrils did not simply trail. They tasted. When one brushed the hull, the wood flinched. I wanted to be angry and had lost the nouns for it. The brother broke. He ran into the wheelhouse and shut the door because people close doors when they do not want anyone to talk them out of something. I followed, 3 seconds too late, and the door swung inward on air shaped like somebody. He had gone the way men go when they step into a story that is willing to be a mouth. Rourke swore once in a tone that made the word older and put his head down on the wheel for exactly the length of one breath. Then he lifted it and took out the pistol he had kept under the console. the way men keep pieces of their past under things. He checked the chamber, and not me. Captain, I said, and reached and then didn't. The sea keeps debts, he said. It's kinder than people. It takes what it says it will. He looked at me as if measuring whether I was something exact he could pass forward. Don't answer it. Then he put the barrel under his chin and turned the world into a sound. My ears refused to file. I do not remember moving his body. I do not remember covering him. I do not remember throwing up or not. I remember the note holding, a pressure in my bones I could not stand and could not escape. I remember stepping out onto the deck and seeing the tendrils rising to meet the rail, each bright barb the blue of cold steel. I remember thinking how simple it would be to stop thinking, and how rest felt like a kind of mercy that would take only this one small yes. I leaned, the tendrils hesitated, a dignified inch from my face, and I understood that it would not take me by force. It wanted consent, because consent is a door that stays open after it passes. The note lifted in pitch like a hand held out. I thought of my father standing on the bank of the river with his hand on my shoulder, telling me how to throw a line and not catch a tree, and I heard his voice in my head as clearly as if he had been saving it for me. The sea doesn't give you back. No, I said. I said it once and the note turned plaintive. I said it twice and it turned hard. The tendrils pressed the space between us like glass. The rings of eyes blinked wrong. The mouth ground air and decided not to eat it. No, I said again, not louder, but as if I had been practicing refusal since I was small. The fog roared like applause and then like anger. The water boiled. The boat listed and listed back. The creature, if it was even a single thing, shuddered with the petulance of something unused to know. Then it went down so fast it made a hole, and water slapped back in, and the sound that had been pretending to be a voice gave up. Dawn came with the particular paleness of mercy extended to one person and withheld from three. The fog thinned by giving itself to the sky. Shoreline appeared, first a smudge, then a rumor of angles, then the real weight of land holding still. I started the engine with hands that did not deserve to be allowed to. The compass had been nailed to the console by Rourke in a moment of superstition or insult. Its needle spun like an opinion. I steered by the lighthouse, which was the only honest thing left. They asked me questions on the dock, and I gave them answers that were shaped like lies and tasted like truth. I said the sea took them. That was the kind of sentence men had been using there since the bay silted its first boat in. The harbor master nodded, as if he had been prepared to file that paperwork. The lighthouse keeper, who is a man who can tell you how many times the lens has been polished and the names of the men who died while polishing it, put a hand on my shoulder for a second too long, and then went back to counting his steps on his tower. Breaker's Point accepted me back because Breaker's Point understands that if you are breathing, you have already paid. I slept on a friend's couch with the TV on because laugh tracks keep ghosts from memorizing your heartbeat. When rain came, the sound on the window was a language I had to ask to repeat itself slowly. In the grocery store, a child dropped a jar of pickles, and I almost went to my knees at the sound of glass and liquid and sudden absence. I walked to the marina at noon like a person visiting the scene of a crime to practice saying the word accident without crying. The Maudlin rocked at her mooring like nothing bad had happened on her. Somebody had hosed the deck. I could smell bleach and the ocean at the same time, and wanted to take both smells out of the world. Joel's mother came in from 2 towns over and asked me where her boy went. She was 50 and looked 70 because grief can burn a person from the inside out. I told her the sea took him and watched a woman practice believing a sentence so she could keep standing. The brother who lived was the brother of no one now. He did not come to the dock. He sat in the bar and watched the door until their mother came through it, and then learned how to apologize without words. At the memorial, the priest said nice things about men who did not attend church, and the lighthouse turned 3 times slow, and then steadied, and I stood there with my hands open at my sides so as not to start clapping at the fact that anyone who could read a prayer would give me one for free. I did not go back on the water. I took odd jobs, painting houses that faced west and peeled every winter, stacking boxes behind the bait shop where the ice machine leaks like nerves. It didn't matter. In the middle of the night, the note returned, soft at first like a song remembered through a wall, then stronger in waves. It found me in my cheap apartment 2 streets off the harbor, through drywall and window glass, through poor insulation and the kettle steam. It did not need water to conduct itself. It had learned me. Sometimes it woke me with a gentle tap. Sometimes it rose like a flood, until I sat up with my hands on my ears, ridiculous as a child, and said out loud, "No," and meant it 40 times before it receded into whatever we give the word away to. Once, I woke at 3:17 with my mouth full of salt, so heavy I gagged. There was no water in the room. My pillow was dry. The taste faded like a rudeness someone apologizes for badly. I did not go back to sleep. I sat at the little table and drew circles on a napkin the way a child draws suns. In the morning, I threw the napkin away and took the trash out and felt oddly like a man who had carried something fragile past a dog. Breaker's Point had always had rules that were called advice until you broke them. Don't wear green on a boat. Don't rope a killjoy to the stern. Don't say rabbit. Don't cut your nails on a Friday. Don't mention the thing that takes fish except to say, respectfully, it has been here longer than us. I learned new ones. Don't drink bath water. Don't hum at night. Don't answer the kettle when it clicks and you hear your name in it. Don't lean too long over a pitcher of water, even if it's from the tap, because the surface will shape itself into a circle, and circles will remember you. I went to the library and looked for maps. The old ones had notes scrawled in margins. Good bottom, bad set, no luck. One had a small skull and crossbones, 20 miles southeast of the point, drawn by a hand that enjoyed drawing. Another had a circle like a coffee ring that had bled through to the page below, and someone had written under it in pencil, year indeterminate, don't. The librarian is the kind of woman who watches you watch books and pretends not to. When I brought the atlas to the desk, she said, "You don't want that one." And I said no, and carried it home anyway. I kept the compass Rourke had nailed. The nail had bent on the way in. The head had a little scar in it, where a hammer had lost patience. The needle did not settle. I set it on my kitchen table and watched it spin and sometimes stop and then pretend it had decided to stop itself. Now and then, at 12:07 or 4:19, or at exactly the moment my coffee finished, the needle would point not to north, but to a corner of the room, and if I turned to look, nothing would be there except the fact of the room and the way light loves dust. I learned to say hello to corners. That seemed to be enough. A man from the Coast Guard came by 2 weeks after and asked twice as many questions as the harbor master and half as kindly. He wanted times, coordinates, wind speed, wave height, the color of the water right before. I told him what I could without telling him what I would never have been able to explain. He wrote down my answers and pretended they were adequate. "You see anything out of the ordinary?" he asked at the end, as if he had saved the dessert for last. "No," I said, and left it at that, because some things hate being measured and will break your ruler for the attempt. The note found me in church because my landlady still goes, and once a month she says it won't kill you, and I know she is right. The choir was trying for a harmony and missing it by a kindness. The organ hummed. A child dropped a hymn book, and the bang rang like a buoy. Under the hymn, under the white noise of people being respectful, the low tone I knew, now the way you know your own tiredness rose and stretched to my jaw. I almost laughed then, because where else should it have found me but where people are practicing an answer? I did not sing. I mouthed the words and said no. One evening in December, when the wind had decided glass should remember what it is made of, I walked down to the harbor and found the lighthouse keeper standing at the bottom of his stairs, with his hands in his pockets as if keeping them from falling. He looked at the water with a steadiness it hadn't earned. "Well?" he said without turning, and I said, "Well?" He is the kind of man who doesn't tell stories unless you offer him the exact right sentence. I did not find it. We stood together anyway, looking at the place the horizon had been lost, and he said eventually, "It knows when you say no," which was a frightening kindness. I keep thinking about Jules' face right before he went over. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't relief, and it wasn't surrender. It was recognition. I hate that. I hate that the note finds the shape of you and tells you who you are if you let it. I am stubborn because I am afraid. That is not noble. It is accurate. Stubbornness can be a life jacket you have to put your head through anyway. Sometimes, late, the plumbing hums in my apartment in a tone I do not care for. Sometimes the kettle clicks on its own, and I unplug it and put the plug on the windowsill like a talisman children understand. Once, the glass on the coffee table fogged very lightly, and a circle formed where my mug had not been, and inside the circle, the moisture cleared as if a finger had been drawn through it. It made no letters. It did not need to. I wiped it with the sleeve of my sweater before it had the chance to shape anything else. If you want a hero, you'll have to hire one. I will give you a man with a stove that works and a compass that won't. A man who can't drive past the harbor without counting how many boats have their lines double coiled. A man who knows the taste of salt in a dry room and does not call a doctor because who would he tell? There are places under the sea where the pressure will make your blood decide to be vapor if you go there. And there are places inside your skull where a thought will do the same, and it turns out the distance between the two is not as long as I'd hoped. People leave Breakers Point all the time. They go to cities where water stays in its pipes. They go inland where horizons end in fences they can fix. Sometimes those people come back because their parents die, or their knees tell them they should have stayed home. When they stand on the dock and smell the harbor again, they make a face, then they make another, then they make peace. The sea keeps its debts, the land keeps other kinds. I have not been asked out past the point since. Men who need hands have learned not to knock on my door because rumor stiffens and finds a direction. I carry Rourke's compass in my jacket pocket when I walk, and sometimes I take it out and put it on my palm, and the needle points at the bay, and then at the gutter, and then at my chest, and I think, yes, of course. I bought a plant, and it died, and I bought a cactus, and it died, and I bought a rock, and it has been my best work. There are nights the fog rolls up the street from the harbor like something that got the wrong address and is trying to be polite about it. It tucks itself against the lamp posts and the shoes people forgot on porches. It finds my window and leaves the suggestion of a circle, and then just the fog itself, which is only water pretending to be air. I lie in bed and listen to the building breathe, and the tone comes, the long, unkind note, and I put my hand on the wall and say no with all the small authority of someone who got away once, and the wall vibrates and then stops. If you ever go out there and it finds you, and it will, if you go far enough or quiet enough or wrong enough, remember this, and remember it in the part of you that memorizes phone numbers and the faces of people you have to tell bad news to. It wants consent, so it doesn't have to be a thief. Don't answer it. Not in words, not in thoughts. It will offer you release. It will call that love. It will show you cities that were never built and will ask your opinion. It will teach you the names of doors, and it will not mention locks. You tell it no, patiently if you can, angrily if you must, stupidly if that is all you have. Learn the sound of your own refusal so well you can find it in a wind or a wall or a tank of water. Keep a dry towel in the kitchen. Keep a dumb rock on the table. Keep your mouth shut over cups. Say your father's sentence like it was written by a prophet. The sea doesn't give you back. Then let the kettle boil, because kettles must, and take it off the burn before it screams, and hold on to your small, ordinary breath until the note fades to something that could be called weather again. Now on to the next story. The first time the radio spoke in a voice that didn't belong to anyone living, I was cleaning salt from the brass on the lamp floor and counting the strokes of the light like a penitent. The radio down in the watchroom clicked, hissed, then settled into a low murmur I'd already learned meant weather. I let it talk to itself. A lighthouse will make your world small on purpose. You clean, you wind, you log, you drink coffee that tastes like decisions. You walk the same circular stairs until your legs know them without you. And every hour, in every kind of night, you go up and you watch the world forget you exist. I'd taken the winter relief watch on Helmuth Point because the town had gotten too loud. Breakers Point is hardly a city, but grief makes even kind voices sound like fixes. My older brother's tools were still in my truck. His name still insisted on being called from the far end of bars by men who wanted to pay me for stories I didn't know how to tell. When the Coast Administration posted for a keeper who could read a light, maintain a generator, and not scare easy, I said yes fast, like it was a rescue coming from my own mouth. Helmuth isn't the tallest tower on this coast or the oldest. It's a white cylinder on a finger of basalt. The sea chews with decent manners. A keeper's cottage hunkers at its base. 2 rooms stuffed with sensible things. A cot stout enough to forgive you. Shelves full of ledgers and a hand better than mine. A stove that has learned to pretend it's grateful when you feed it. Driftwood. The solar panels were new and sulky. The foghorn was old and honest. Everything smelled like iron. On my 4th night, with the horizon frosted in starlight and the sea behaving too well for my comfort, the radio in the watchroom cleared its throat and said distinctly, "To any station, this is the survey steamer Alethea, requesting radio check." The voice was rounded and precise, the vowels older, the kind of diction you only hear from recordings in museum exhibits, the captions helpfully explaining how brave people used to speak. I stood at the desk and put my hand on the microphone. The rules for keepers on Helmuth said keep transmissions to a minimum. The other rules said you were the contact of record for 20 miles in any direction, and if a human voice asks for help, you answer. "Alethea, this is Helmuth Light," I said, keeping my tone dull and square. "We have you. Your signal is readable. What is your position?" 3 miles south by east of the point, 2 cables off the reef, the voice said. Paper rustled. "We have lost our launch in rough weather and require assistance landing on the tower." The radio clicked faintly, as if a gloved hand had brushed it. I looked out through the watchroom window. Bare sliver of moon, calm sea, no white on the reef, no red light on a mast. The lamp above me performed its lonely slice. I climbed to the gallery with the binoculars, because sane men still do things even when they know they're props. The reef that gives Helmuth its name lay black as a thought. No ship, no launch, no sense. "Alethea," I said, down at the desk again, "I don't see you. Say again your position." "Point bearing true west," the voice said with mild impatience. "We are sounding occasionally. Fog has increased. Are your siren and lamp operational?" I glanced up at the foghorn lever out of reflex. It sat where it always sat, asleep. "We have no fog," I said. "Sirens are tested every shift. Lamp is operational." This is a long crackle, a breath between numbers. 1957 hours. Another Velvet Court Museum voice in the background said quietly, "Let's try the other handset," and the transmission ended. I didn't call it in. The handbook was clear on prank frequencies. Every kid with an antenna and a six-pack had tried to make the coasties dance, but that voice had carried starch with it. If it was a prank, it was the kind that made its own year. I logged the contact like a coward and went up to wind the clockwork anyway, because doing what I came here to do was how I knew to be a person. 2 nights later, they called again. Helmuth Light, this is the Alethea, on station to recover Bell 3, the voice said. It said the words as if they were normal. We request permission to dispatch a boat. It should be funny hearing something that formal ask permission of a building. It felt like being asked to bless an operation that would go wrong. Negative, I said, surprising myself. We have heavy surge on the reef. No landing. Advise you stand clear. A pause, the exact pause a man takes when he is smiling politely and waiting for you to remember what he told you already. Acknowledged, the voice said. Will ring from the launch. The radio cut, and the horn on the point blew once, without any of my hands on it. Out over the water, beyond the reef, a pale circle pressed itself up through the surface and held. You could do the physics of it if you liked. A slick of calm in a swell, a trick of currents, a lens. It wasn't my first slick. It was my first that caught moonlight like polished bronze. The circle dipped and rose. Something surfaced in it, a bell's crown, green with age, ring-free but mouth sunk, humming so deep the window panes of the watchroom chimed like glassware. If you told me you could hear a bell with its rim under water, I'd be polite in the way I am when old men tell me the fish are biting. But the shelves in the cottage rattled, and the floor under my boots felt the note, and the sound climbed my jaws and found the place under my eyes where sorrow had decided to live and asked to be let in. I went out onto the gallery by reflex, as if a breath of night air could make things new. The sea beyond the reef had decided not to bother being waved just there. The bell's note lengthened into a harmony, then into arrangement. There aren't enough verbs for what sound does to people who weren't careful about where they put their winter. I put my hands on the railing and felt it hum. Words rose underneath the sound. I will swear I didn't imagine. Not English, not sounds I could spell. The cadence of a sentence without a transcript. I threw the breaker on the foghorn because I had to touch something. The siren gave a short, ashamed bleat and died. The light went on, doing its work. The circle held. The bell's crown sank so slow I could count my breaths to its burials. The radio clicked as if a hand had brushed dust from its face and said Helmuth Light. Masters advising, do not answer when it replies. Repeat, do not answer. We will attempt with Bell 2. And then the sea shut its mouth without making a point of it. I slept a little that morning and dreamed that the stairs up to the lantern were looped like rope, and that the only way to get to the top was to climb hand over hand. When I woke, I had salt in the palm of my hand and a small greenish ring pressed into the skin where my fingers had caught the railing. It could have been nothing. It was probably nothing. I washed my face until the mirror fogged and tried not to think of the mirror as water. I should have called the administrative office and told some lieutenant that men with old voices were practicing experimental ringing below my light. I should have asked for a patrol boat to come discourage the gullible. If I had been a wise man, I would have said it out loud in daylight, so the saying would sap the power of it. I made coffee instead, and when the pot clicked off, I didn't turn it back on, and the kitchen's quiet felt very full of people who weren't. A week went by. The kind winter gives you as a tip. On clear days, the water off the reef showed its true color. Not blue, not green, something between color and thought. The fog, when it came, kept itself honest. I wound the lamp, I oiled the clockwork, I mended a frayed pull cord and thought, when my fingers played the fibers, briefly of a lock of hair, bound with ribbon, in a bottle, in whose bottle, and put the thought down where I couldn't see it. On the 8th night, the radio said, Helmuth Light, Alethea, now ringing Bell 1. I said nothing. The handbook on the shelf above the desk said nothing would be the correct response. The sea, which had been keeping slow, placid time on the reef, stalled. The foghorn lever twitched and settled. The pale circle rose again, and the bell showed its crown. This time something else came with it. A plate the size of my palm, bronze, flush with pale material, ornamented with fish whose eyes hurt to look at. A trick of light, the lie I keep telling myself I'm willing to believe. I wanted to uncurl my hand to touch the invisible version of it I'd picked up off the railing in my sleep. I kept my hand shut. The bell's humming sloped upward like a hand sliding along the neck of a cello. The windows quivered. The lamp up top steadied itself, because the lamp is a heart, and a heart knows how to disregard 1,000 bad ideas. The humming gave itself to words again, this time almost vowels, this time almost names. Keep, I thought it said, not my name, not a command. Keep, as if the sea had found my job title first and was trying to decide whether I could keep anything at all. The door to the cottage knocked, not tapped by wind, knocked like knuckles on old wood. I turned because the body always has time for the wrong things. At the threshold stood a woman in an oilskin that had once been yellow. She wasn't wet, not in the right way. Her hair lay down as if it remembered being dried by a better fire. She didn't raise her head to look directly at me. Politeness radiated off her like cold. Come away, she said. It will ask, and then you will think answers have to be beautiful. I'm on watch, I said, because the stupid sentences are the ones your mouth has on deck all the time. You're being watched, she said, and her mouth tried to smile at the wrongness of the word, and did not. What's the Alethea? I asked. Our ship, she said, with the dignity of a person who has chosen to consider something still hers, even after it stops being. Then, gently, you shouldn't call her. I didn't, I said, and realized how pitiful it sounded. The radio. She glanced at the set, and it hissed faintly, as if it had chosen to be respectful to her. We have 3 bells, she said. We returned 2. The third was not ours to surface. It answers from below. You keep the light. Do that. Don't add your voice to anything that can carry. What happens if I do? I asked, because men ask questions even when they are about to ignore answers. You'll have to keep more than a light, she said, and someone will have to keep you. I didn't blink. When I did, she had stepped back, and her boots made no sound on the stone steps. The radio breathed. The sea forgot its mirror and became water again. The foghorn lever lay still. My hands hurt. I uncurled them and saw crescents in my palm, where nails had bit, and the faint stain of green I wanted to pretend was oxidation from the brass I'd been cleaning. In the morning, there was an envelope in the log drawer that had not been there the night before. It was sealed in plastic as if the air would eat it. The front said F or Keeper, with a hand that had learned to be careful. Inside was a page from a log, typed letters from a stiff-fingered machine. Harrow Institute, Vessel Alethea, Survey, June 1959. Entries neat, measured, iteration of soundings, retrieval of artifacts, prevailing wind. Then a line typed over the typeface, as if by hand. Do not answer, do not ring, all caps underlined. I called the administrative office that day. I told the duty officer a brief version. Unidentified vessel, making calls on an old frequency, potential hazard at the reef, bell sounds. He listened like he wanted to listen, because he was decent, and told me he'd put a notice to mariners through the usual channels. The usual channels are a sieve and a comfort. I thanked him anyway. That evening at last light, the world made the mistake of being exquisite. The sun went down in a gold that would have offended me if I were a better person. The sea went flat the way it does when it's up to something. I climbed to the gallery and leaned on the rail to watch the last lane of light get eaten in small, polite gulps by distance, and when the dark took over, I stayed because my legs liked the cold. Down past the reef, a light appeared, white, pure, coin neat, another to its right, another farther out. No mast, no shadows where towers should be. My hands tensed on the cold metal until my knuckles decided to belong to somebody else. The lights paced slow, as if a boat pushing against tide. The radio clicked. Helmuth Alethea, the voice said, tender now, coaxing, the way men speak to animals they need to pretend to love. Request you sound your horn for guidance. Our engines are unreliable. No horn, I said, and it came out quieter than I wanted, but not as quiet as I might have made it last week. The lights did not move. They did not dim. They were patient in all the terrible ways. I could have gone down and thrown the breaker. I could have given them a note to follow. I went up instead, to the lantern, where the lamp circled like faith tied to a machine, and the Fresnel lens stood around it like an ice cathedral. The light doesn't ask your permission to be a temple. You work there, you feel it in your knees, and if you go believing in nothing, you come down believing in maintenance, which is a kind of salvation. Below, the pale circle found itself again. The bell's crown breached. The sound rose. It wasn't as loud. It wasn't less cruel. Under it, once more, syllables I couldn't catch. The lights out there brightened in a way lamps don't. I stood there with the brass in my hands and the bitter on my tongue, and said the only thing I had to say, to air that didn't care, to old ship science, to drowned bells, to my brother who wasn't answering any of my winter. No, the bell sank like someone exhaling. The lights went out in order, left to right. The horn lever twitched, lost interest. The radio, all business, spit static, and then a weather bulletin so normal, I wanted to laugh. Days got shorter, the kind of cold that changes your breath's mind about being yours. Found the cottage and sat under the table like a dog you didn't want to admit you owned. When the wind went north by west, the tower sang in two-note chords. One afternoon late in the season, when the sky had gone that shade between purple and stable, the tide pulled itself back, so far even gulls admitted curiosity. The reef rocked with seals that had learned the tower's schedule better than any keeper. In the northmost tide pool, a shape caught light at the bottom, an arc of metal with figures stamped in relief, fish going nowhere in particular. It was a trick of shadow in the water, I told myself. A shadow doesn't smell like coins when you kneel next to it. It doesn't leave green on your fingers when you touch the water and take your hand back shaking. I did something I've been ashamed of since. I took the long-handled net we used to fetch drifted buoys, and I dipped it, not deep, not even sure I'd touched anything. The handle vibrated as if a string had been plucked. The water in the pool darkened, and the arc disappeared. I stood up too fast and had to brace my hand on the rock. When I looked down, a drop of water where my palm had been caught light like glass over letters. Dio not. That night the fog came as if it had receipts. It rolled in fat, confident, close to the ground, so the lamp painted a white wall and then a blank page. I lit the wick in the lantern I keep in the cottage for when the electricity lies and moved it through the rooms like a prayer. You can see. The radio coughed. Helmuth light. Rescue launch kestrel. 2 souls aboard. Request fog signal, said a human voice, not museum diction. Breathless, like a man who'd pulled someone into a boat and wanted that to matter. I reached for the breaker. The woman in the oilskin stood in the doorway. The lantern made her eyes look like the places kelp comes from. They will say they have women and children, she said. They will say they have souls. You know better. What if they do? I said. It came out like a challenge, and I hated it because it meant I was already pretending to be convinced. Then you won't be the one to find them, she said. You'll be the one who answered, and they remember answers. She stepped backward until the fog filled the frame where her coat should have been. Keep, she said softly. Not command, not description, a kindness and a test. My hand on the horn lever shook. I let the lantern's handle dig into my fingers until the pain was bright enough to substitute for thought. I pulled the lever. The horn gave a healthy, righteous bellow. The radio said, "Thank you, Helmuth," in a new voice that was very pleased to hear itself, and then the horn kept blowing even when I let go. The horn blew and blew. The mechanism, which I have taken apart and put back together and cussed at and apologized to, did not trip, did not care, did not tire. The fog around the tower pulsed with the sound like breath. I wrenched the breaker and killed the circuit, and the horn went on. The kettle on the stove clicked on with the breaker off. The lamp upstairs didn't flicker, but I thought I could hear the glass of the lens speaking to itself in small words. I did the stupid thing and stepped out into the fog with the lantern and walked around the tower twice, because a man will carve order anywhere he can. When I came back to the door, there was a bell in the threshold, small, the color of bad pennies, cast with fish whose eyes still hurt to look at. We had given the sea its bell back in autumn. The sea had decided it had been mine. I picked it up. It was not cold. I didn't ring it. My arm wanted to. Arms aren't in charge. The horn blew again because it could. I took the small bell in both hands and carried it up into the gallery, into the lantern room, where the light turns words into rituals. In that cold, pretty roar, I stood in the middle of the circling glass, and I thought of nothing, because thinking was how it would get me, and I put the bell down on the brass floor gently. The horn stopped. The radio went back to weather. The fog stood still, and if fog can look tired, this fog did. I left the bell there. I made tea. I burned my tongue. I didn't sleep. At dawn, when the world decided to offer evidence again, the bell was gone. In the log I wrote, "Fog, horn stuck, free at 0218. I didn't write the rest. A ledger in a keeper's hand is a kind of Bible. You don't put your superstition in someone else's scriptures." You'd think that would be the end of it for any decent story. The small bell taken, then given back. The rule learned. Do not answer. You do your job. You leave. The ocean forgives nothing and forgets only a little, but it moves on because it has bigger, older work. Here's what happened instead. In January, a storm unstitched the coast. The waves stopped pretending to have crests and just heaved. The tower sang on 3 notes, then 6. Spray slapped the gallery glass and clung there like white paint. The generator threatened to get clever and then thought better of it. I ate stew from a can and watched the light and counted, because counting is how the human hand pretends to control. Just after midnight, between gusts, the world fell into a silence like a dropped handkerchief. The radio didn't hiss. The sea didn't speak. The tower didn't remember its song. From below, very far, came a knock, then another, like someone ringing a bell under a cathedral floor. 5, and pause, 6, and pause. The count of the days since I had let the horn blow when the woman said keep. The count of the nights since I had put a bell I never should have had in a place it didn't belong. 7, and pause, the count of the people I had not saved, which is a list you carry whether it is true or not. I went down the stairs into the cottage where you can smell your breath when the wind takes a break. I took my brother's wrench from my duffel because grief keeps you religious about objects. I walked back up into the lantern room and set the wrench down on the floor next to the warm ghost of a bell. "No," I said, to the counting, to the sea, to the part of me that wanted a different math. "Not here." The knock stopped. The storm ejected its breath and threw itself back into the wall of the world like that was all it had ever wanted to do. I sat down and watched the horizon until dawn pretended to make a difference, and my hands stopped wanting to make shapes. They called the relief keeper in early spring. He pulled up in a boat that had survived things by apologizing to them. He brought bread. He shook my hand like it meant something. He said, anything to note? And I said, the horn sticks sometimes. And he said, they all do. And I almost told him everything like a sinner in a booth. And then I remembered what the woman in the oilskin had said. You keep the light. Don't add your voice to anything that can carry. On my last afternoon, with the world flat and new and the gulls practicing lines for summer, I walked the path from the cottage to the edge of the basalt, where fishermen had worn their prayer into the rock. At the far lip of the biggest tide pool, the water looked deeper than it was allowed to. A shape lay in the bottom, not a bell, a ring. Bronze fish around it. The water put a gloss on it, so precise I could have written addresses on it. I stood there a full minute with the net in my hand and a little green smear at the edge of my vision. I thought about my brother's tools still in my truck, about the wrench I had left on the floor like an offering, about the small bell that had visited and then gone the way everything goes here. Then I put the net away. The launch took me off after sunset because men like to do things in ways that will make them better when told later. The relief keeper raised a hand at the gallery like a poor man praying. I raised mine back because poor men know each other. When we rounded the reef, a light came up out there, white, coin bright, and it held steady at a distance I had learned to call safe. The boatman looked at it and looked away as if to apologize. You see that? He asked, not needing the answer. Not on any chart. Everything is on some chart, I said, and we both smiled because we both knew which god we had just insulted. Back in town, the same men were on the same chairs, and they wanted to tell me the same stories about whether they were married to. The harbor smelled like old iron and fry oil, and yesterday's brave. Someone had written "Do not answer" on the chalkboard outside the diner as a joke under the fish specials, and someone had crossed it out, and someone had written it again smaller under the coffee prices. I put my brother's wrench in the bottom drawer in my apartment and slept for the first time in months until the world had started without me, and I woke with salt on my teeth and the taste of pennies in relief. If there's a moral here, I don't want it. If there's a map, it doesn't belong to me. Some nights in town, when the electricity stops trying and the refrigerators make a new religion, I hear a long old note under the building's breath, and I put my palm flat on the wall and I say nothing, because not answering is the only liturgy I know. Some mornings I walk to the diner and the chalkboard says something I can make, and my coffee tastes like the inside of a brass instrument that has finally learned not to sing when you don't ask it, and that counts as a blessing because I have chosen to call it one. Once, at the edge of town where the road forgets to be sure of itself, a woman in a yellow oilskin walked past me on the shoulder and inclined her head in thanks. For what? I didn't ask. Keep, she might have said, and I did, and I do. When I close my eyes on the worst days, I see the pale circle rise and hold, and the bell's crown, and the ring plate with its fish, and I know what it means to name what you were not meant to drag into your own shallow. When I open them, there's the sidewalk, there's my poor pair of boots, there's the coffee steam, the sea keeps its debts, the land keeps its poor book, full of names and little drawings of weather. I walk in the space between and try to remember which kind of quiet I can live with. And if the lights come up beyond the reef when I'm back at Helmuth next winter, and the radio asks as if asking is the courtesy that matters, I will do the small hard thing that felt like the only thing that made sense. I will keep the light. I will not answer. I will let the horn stay silent until it has earned its breath. And if the bell rises again, humming the long old word that wants me harder than anything else wants me, I will put my hand on the rail and tell it no, as if no were a kind of song, and maybe the glass will whisper back, and maybe that will be enough. Now on to the next story. I didn't tell anyone about the tunnel the next morning. I told myself I was being sane. No reason to share a nightmare with people who were already convinced I needed a vacation. I shaved carefully because my hands were unsteady, found a jagged streak on my cheekbone where some unseen thing had grazed me, and told myself it was a scratch from a vine. I threw away the shirt that stank of damp fur. I left early for work so I could walk the long way around the rail yard, keeping the chain link fence between me and that slab of rock that had been a tunnel and then hadn't. All day the municipal building felt wrong, too hollow, corridors long as tunnels, fluorescence humming in a register just below what I could ignore. When I closed my eyes to rub away the headache swelling behind them, I saw alcoves in the dark, and shoes arranged in pairs, laces tied neat as if for school. The shoe thing bothered me more than the eyes or the teeth. Teeth are honest. Shoes mean someone made an effort. By noon, I couldn't pretend I was doing work. I hovered at my cubicle and then drifted to the break room and then sat at the far end of the parking lot with a sandwich I didn't want, watching a weed push through asphalt 1 millimeter at a time. After a while, the door banged open, and Victor from Records stepped out with his vape. He was one of those men who try not to notice when other people are drowning. The noticing would require more kindness than he believed he had a right to spend. He took one look at me and squinted. "You look like you slept in a dryer," he said. "You finally ditched the car?" "Battery," I said. "It died." "You should have called," he said, and looked briefly embarrassed at having offered anything like help. "I've got cables." "What, you walked all the way out?" "Through the yard," I said before I could stop myself. I cut across. Victor exhaled vapor and watched it get murdered by the wind. "Don't do that," he said. "Kids go in there and spray dicks on things and then cry when a cop makes them explain the dicks to their mother. Also, there's sinkholes. City never capped the old culverts. You slip in one, nobody hears you unless they need a lawsuit." "Yeah," I said, because I needed him to keep talking. "What about the tunnel?" "What tunnel?" he said. "The one that cuts under the hill." I said, "Wide as a train could want. Black stains around the mouth. Slope. It goes on a long time." Victor frowned like he was measuring whether to laugh. "There's no tunnel," he said. "There used to be a spur and a culvert. The spur got pulled 40 years ago. The culvert's a joke. Every spring a teenager climbs into it and thinks they discovered hell. It's 3 feet tall and full of raccoon shit." I pressed my tongue to the back of my teeth to keep words from happening. "Maybe I dreamed it," I said. "Maybe you hired someone to dream it for you," he said. "Get a jump pack. There's a guy on Maple sells them out of his shop for half price. Call him Jerry, and he gives you the cable for free. Don't call him Gerald. Gerald is his father, who is dead, who Gerald thinks would have been a better man if only everyone had called him Jerry, which is why you call him Jerry. Got it, I said, and Victor looked relieved to have restored the world to the version he could live in. He slapped my shoulder, left behind a chemical citrus, and went back inside. I bought the jump pack because Victor had given me a script, and scripts are soothing. After work, I started the car, let it idle until the engine stopped sounding offended, and drove the long way around town, careful not to angle my eyes toward the yard. When I reached my apartment, I took the stairs instead of the elevator because moving more made the dreamishness wear off. I locked my door, then latched the chain, then slid the deadbolt, then pulled a chair under the knob because I am a reasonable man who behaves reasonably, and sat down at the little table with the little lamp and tattooed my fingertips with coffee to make the shaking useful. I lasted 3 hours. The stillness in the building thickened until it felt like the air had hands. The radiator knocked once and then twice, and the second knock had rhythm. I put water in the sink and let the tap run until it made honest domestic noises, and then turned it off and listened to the silence brace again. Outside, wind walked the street and scraped a downed sign over pavement. On the stairwell, someone's kid dropped a toy, and a parent hissed, not unkindly, and the child said sorry, and the word sounded like a prayer taught wrong. I stood up because sitting felt like permission. My phone lay on the table like a witness. I put it in my pocket and told myself I was going for a walk. I left the chair under the doorknob and left the lamp on because the room had started to look like a face if I didn't. The night leaned against me when I opened the building's front door. The town wore its emptiness cleanly, old factories hulking in their glassless grace. A few bars lit up like resistance, the single bus sighing past with two riders who didn't look up. I told my feet to turn left, away from the yard. They turned right. The closer I came, the quieter the air got. Not quieter like a library, quieter like a hospital corridor at 2 a.m. that goes on forever and has no doors. At the fence, I stopped. The weed-choked ground on the other side looked like it always did. Mounds, rails buckled with heat and neglect. A rolling stock carcass, rusting itself into a sculpture no one would ever commission. I scanned the rock face where the tunnel ought to be and saw only vines and shadow. I told myself I was sane because nothing was there. I waited. The waiting did something to the world. Dark shapes developed depth. A lighter patch was not rock but cement, and there a line, not a crack exactly. The suggestion of an arch. A smell touched the back of my mouth, metal and wet fur, and that hard sweet that comes from long-stored air. My throat closed. My feet moved. My knees buckled and unbuckled as I climbed the fence, and then I was on the ballast stones, and then I was close enough to see the black stains, be not soot, but something layered and jelly-like, as if the stone had been repeatedly licked by something with a mouth too broad. "Don't," someone said behind me. I turned so fast my ankle complained. A man stood 10 yards back in the weeds, hands in his coat pockets, profile to me, profile to the wall. He was thin in the way of people who have stopped trying to convince their bodies to do things. A cap on his head that had once been city-issued, the logo faded to a ghost. He didn't look at me. "Don't," he said again, conversationally. "It'll take another piece if you let it." I waited for a smell, for a scrape. The night gave me nothing but the man's breath and the wind. "You work for the city?" I asked because the jacket wanted me to. "I did," he said. "I dug once. I laid pipe. I know where all the holes used to be and where the ground pretends not to remember them. That one there is not a hole." He jerked his chin at the arch. "Not anymore. Did you see it?" I asked. He smiled a little, without showing teeth. "I watched Eddie go in," he said. "I watched Eddie come out wrong. I watched him go back, because the wrong made promises to itself." "What's in there?" I asked, because questions keep air moving. "It's not in there," he said. "It's in us. It uses that shape to get to a shape it finds useful in you. You go in, it uses you. You don't go in, it uses your wanting to go in. It is very patient. I can be patient too." He rocked on his heels once, a child motion borrowed by a man. "I come here and stand and look and leave. That's all the winning there is." "What did Eddie see?" I asked. He pulled his hands from his pockets and showed me palms lined like a map. "He told me about the shoes," he said, "about how the pairs were so neat, like people had taken their time. He told me about a sound like someone scrubbing a floor on the other side of a wall. He told me about the way the light doesn't fall right. We don't drink together anymore." He put his hands back away. "You should go." "I can't," I said, and didn't know until the words were there that they were true. The man nodded, like he had taken delivery of a parcel. "When you come out," he said, "if you come out, don't look around. Don't look back. Don't look at me. If you do, it'll make a friend of that. We don't need any more friends." He turned and walked into the weeds and vanished without any drama, like a person who had learned not to give legends away to memorize him. I stood there until my feet began to ache at being used as roots, and then I went into the dark. The temperature drop hit like a hand closing over a flame. My ears popped. The air folded up around me. My phone's flashlight pushed 10 feet of honesty and then failed to persuade anything else. The rails gleamed faintly with a wet that didn't penetrate, as if they were sweating. I told myself to move slowly. I stepped over a tie and almost fell because the ground tilted towards something my eyes couldn't tell me about. The alcoves came faster this time, closer to the entrance if there had been an entrance. The dolls in one were lined up in a row, 9 of them, each with a cracked cheek as if someone had flicked them with a finger too hard. In another, ceramic insulators sat in a pyramid like offerings. Then shoes, men's leather with steel caps, ladies' pumps with worn-down tips, kids' sneakers with lights that must have blinked when new, all paired, all placed so precisely the care was its own cruelty. I kept expecting the skitter. When it came, the relief was cousin to terror. Familiarity makes fear feel earned. It started as a whisper of something heavy making itself light. Then claws found stone, and the sound changed from caution to willingness. I angled my light and saw only the afterglow of movement, like heat shimmer without heat. Wet fur smell, old in far places. The alcove seemed to lean out to watch. I trapped a breath in my throat and tried to spend it slowly. Not yet, I said, and hadn't meant to speak aloud, but the shape of the sentence comforted something childish in me. Not yet. The tunnel dropped abruptly, a step I didn't see until my heel went looking for a floor that had shifted. I sat down hard, my spine complaining in a language I understood. My phone clattered and skated on the rail, and my heart did a small polite jump meant for everyday surprises. The light swung and made the alcoves flicker. In that strobe I saw, for an instant too brief to be trustworthy, a figure in one of the cutouts turn its head. Not yet, I said again, because repetition is armor, and stood up and reminded my feet about gravity. I picked up the phone and told it thanks under my breath, like a man who had once believed in objects and needed to practice. The slope eased, the air shifted, not warmer, different, like being under a bridge in summer rain and then stepping into a culvert where the rain has not taught the air anything. The walls flexed, not a trick, not breath, but a changing of decision. I swung the light and saw the surfaces, not as concrete or stone, but as layers like pressed fibers, as if the tunnel had been made by laying down sheet upon sheet of a material that wanted to be skin. I thought of scar tissue. I thought of the man's hands with their map lines. I thought of something trying to grow a shape it had admired once. I reached a place that wasn't a room and wasn't a hallway. The rails fanned into 3, but the middle track dove into a dip and disappeared under a sudden pool, black as fresh oil. On the right, a platform rose, old tile cracked and flaking, a ghost of a stripe where paint had decided to be faithful. On the left, an alcove larger than the rest. My light hit a sign above the platform and conjured a word from water stains and memory, Halcyon. Beneath it, smaller letters that hadn't survived, like the names of stops on a line that never opened. I climbed the platform because it was higher and higher, felt like smarter. The tile bit my hands as I crawled. Up there, the smell of fur receded, replaced by another smell I recognized from hospital basements, used antiseptic and long paper. The platform had benches, iron frames and slats, the kind that break your back and make you sit up out of courtesy. On one sat a single shoe. Its pair lay on the floor facing it, toes pointed toward toes. I stepped over them, because stepping between felt like interrupting a conversation. At the end of the platform a doorway yawned, not to tunnel but to a room. My light found the bones of an office. Desk, chair turned slightly, as if hastily left, a lamp with its shade askew. Papers on the floor had turned into a soft felted layer that tried to mend itself after my foot tore it. The walls were a color bureaucrats favor when they don't want to admit they like color. On the far wall a big map, glass cracked, northern half missing. The map showed a city like mine, and not like mine. Lines ran under it in colors that were not the colors our transit wore: oxblood, mustard, indigo, and the legend in the corner said Halcyon Subterranean Passage Authority. Proposed lines, proposed stations, a fingernail sketch of intention never funded. On the edge of the map, someone had penciled notes: soil conditions, water table, bedrock peculiarities. One word had been circled 3 times: blind clay. Another had been underlined: voids. On the desk lay a folder labeled with a stamped date from the year before I was born. My brain told my hand not to touch it. My hand opened it anyway. Inside, black and white photographs, men in hard hats standing by a cut made in earth that looked neither like soil nor stone, but like the middles of things. Another photo, a cylinder the size of a man's chest stuck into that clay as if the clay had grown around it. Another, a bell-shaped object hauled up by chain, wet and wrong, its surface filmed with a slime the camera could not make ridiculous. Handwriting on the back of one: acoustic anomalies during lift, recommend suspension. On another, do not ring. Something moved in the doorway behind me, and I turned and dropped the folder and put both hands flat on the desk, because that gesture felt older than panic. In the dark beyond the platform, a shape stood, not fully in the world, a heap of decision. The eyes weren't eyes, the mouth was a method. It did not rush, it did not need to. When it shifted, the rails sang a little, as if tuning. You want to be seen, I said, which was a betrayal I would think about later. The head cocked, not a head, a weight that tried the angle a head would use. It stepped forward, and the light caught ridges along a spine that hadn't wanted to be a spine, but had accepted the assignment. The front limbs took weight like arms do. The hands, no. The ends of them were not hands. They were tools that had learned hands were useful. It stopped 3 feet from the edge of the platform. It could have made the distance fast. It didn't. It extended one limb toward the bench. The limb trembled, not with effort, but with the frustrating intimacy of trying to be precise. It tapped the shoe. The shoe toppled off the slat, hit tile, landed next to its pair. There, balanced, correct. The creature withdrew the limb as if ashamed of having demonstrated anything. It likes pairs, I said, because my mouth hadn't learned from my heart. It likes order. The sound it made wasn't a hiss. It was the breath people make when they see a baby and don't want to scare it. Then it moved, not forward, not back, sideways. It rippled at the edges, the way heat does on August asphalt. Where it went, the dark folded in like dough. It didn't vanish. It inverted. The space it had occupied kept the memory of weight, and then forgot, the way a mattress remembers a body, and then only a dent. The floor in the room under my feet shuddered, not an earthquake, something below, adjusting posture. In the pool by the third rail, a bubble came up and popped soundlessly, a perfect dome, visible only because a dusting of paper ash on the surface made it draw a ring. My light found the dark beyond, and found eyes in it, 12, then 24, low on the ground, the height of a dog's. They blinked one after the other like a sentence, hoping to be understood. I should have left then. I don't have a reason that will satisfy anyone who likes stories tidy. I put the folder back together, because putting things back has been my way of supplicating the day for years. I went into the tunnel beyond the office, because beyond is a direction that tempts better men. The hallway here had been chiseled, not grown. Numbers stenciled on the walls had bled into the paint. Someone had scrawled help over a locker, and someone else had written, don't answer under it, and the fact that both hands learned the same wall soothed me until it didn't. The scraping returned, now directly ahead, not alone. A second sound braided through it, a wet scrubbing, the kind you hear when a mop meets old tile. I turned my light parallel to the floor to catch edges and saw tracks, long drag marks, inches wide, rhythmic, beside them prints like hands with too many knuckles. The corridor ended in a chamber. I don't know what to call it without making it less true. A waiting room? A nest? The ceiling rose and sagged in long swells. The walls were neither alcove nor bedrock, but something in between, scooped and smoothed and licked. In the middle, a heap of objects was arranged with an intelligence that made my throat ache. Not hoard, not dump, arrangement, a circle of shoes, pairs nested, laces tucked into themselves, a perimeter of helmets dented into near symmetry, a ring of lunch pails, their handles threaded through each other like holding hands. In the very center, copper bells no bigger than your palm, 9 of them, each cast with fish in relief, eyes too careful. Behind the heap, partly within the wall, partly without, the creature watched. No, 2. The first was the one from the platform. The second was smaller by exactly the amount you didn't want to admit. Mattered. It made a soft grating noise, a complaint without words. The larger tilted slightly, a weight shift as elegant and resigned as apparent. "I'm sorry," I said, and wanted to swallow the apology because it made my mouth feel foolish. I stopped myself because finishing a sentence in a place like this is how you get cuffed to your own verbs. The smaller moved, not towards me, toward the bells. It placed one limb over them, careful, as if covering a sleeping thing. The limb pressed down. The bell chimed without moving. The sound was not metal. It was a thought given permission to be a note. It hurt and it didn't. It called and it didn't. The larger made the soft breath again, not scolding, not praise. The smell of antiseptic returned in a wave, accompanied by another smell. Old paper lit on fire and then put out. The wall to my right bulged, and a seam opened. Not with violence, with preference. A room adjacent unfolded itself. Inside, shelves. Inside the shelves, boxes stamped Halcyon and dates. On the floor, a pile of papers fallen out of an open box. Memos, proposals, minutes of meetings where men pretend to agree. On top, a letter with a letterhead from the Institute, and a paragraph that turned my stomach like a hand. Acoustic experiments to be suspended pending further review. Loss of animal specimens, loss of personnel, unexpected responses from substructure. Do not ring. Something behind me shifted, and a shadow fell over the paper. My phone vibrated in my pocket. No service, no caller, just the reflex of a device trained to remind you you live elsewhere. I looked anyway because compulsion doesn't care about signal. The screen brightened. For an instant, my reflection in the black glass had someone behind it. The smaller creature had edged farther from the wall. It was not brave. It was not shy. If I named it either, I would be doing it a disservice, placing it on a chart with lions and rabbits. It was curious in the way a shadow is curious. It held itself out of my light, not because the light hurt it, but because the light evicted it from a shape it preferred. The limb over the bells lifted a fraction, like a teacher asking if I could see the board. "I can't take anything," I said, and meant it like a confession. If I take anything, I don't come back the same. The larger angled its body. The ridges along its back caught my light like the edges of a book. It lowered its head, heavy and alien, and tapped the floor once, a gentle knock that carried the weight of stone. It was not a threat. It was attention, the kind of sound you make to yourself right before you do something you shouldn't. The bells hummed, not as from a strike, but as from being named. All 9. The sound swelled, and the room changed temperature the way a mouth changes temperature when a name is spoken in it. Far down the tunnel, something answered, a lower note, heavier, slower, as if another room had been listening and liked being consulted. The smaller creature flinched. The larger stepped between the bells and the door without moving its feet, a trick that made me nauseated. "I will not answer," I said. "I will not ring. I don't know if the vow mattered to anyone but me. My bones believed me. That seemed like more than I deserved." The ceiling flexed. A line of water fell from somewhere like a string pulled tight and snapped. It hit the bells and broke its shape and ran off in threads. The sound it made when it met the metal was tiny and full and living. The nine hummed as one, then as three chords, then as a coil of sound that grew legs. Past the mound, something peeled itself off the wall. Not small, not medium, enough. It didn't come toward me. It didn't go away. It stretched like something in sleep deciding to wake, and the stretch made the entire chamber shiver. I backed toward the door without being entirely sure there had been a door. The smaller made a noise finally that I could call fear without feeling I had insulted it. The larger shifted again, a paternal sadness. The ridges along its back rose and fell in a wave, like a breath caught and released. I understood then that the ridges weren't ridges. They were scars where the knot skin had been forced to admit a structure under it. Something had taught it to bear weight. Perhaps bells, perhaps us. I made it into the corridor, then to the platform, then to the tracks. I did not run, because running would have fed something I didn't want to feed. The pool by the third rail remained placid, except for a single bubble that rose and popped with the dignity of a punctuation mark. The eyes at the edge of my light blinked in sequence like a console starting up. At the base of the platform, the single shoe I had stepped over earlier had rotated a quarter turn, as if facing the correctness of the pair at last. At the slope, the skittering returned behind me. Not the creature from the chamber, not the larger one, something else, lighter, a scout, a child. My throat tried to close. I kept walking. The alcoves lifted and lowered their wet. A doll rolled a fraction, or maybe my light pretended it. When the slope tilted up, I allowed my legs to acknowledge gratitude. My breath sounded like someone else's. A scraping came parallel with my hip, a gentle keeping pace, then fell back. When the wall gave way to night, it did so without flourish. One moment my world was stitched to tunnel. The next, cold air slid under my shirt, and I nearly wept. I stepped out, and the lot spread around me, rails, weeds, the municipal building like a ship's bow. I did not look left or right. I did not look back. I walked across the stones into ragged grass, into pavement, and did not stop until the streetlights were too bright, and a drunk man outside Finnegan's yelled at his friend that the world was a movie about him, and the friend yelled that if so, the movie had a terrible script. At home, the chair still leaned under the doorknob. I put it back under the table, and then took it away, and then put it back because the shape of the room kept trying to become a mouth. I sat on the floor. My phone chimed nonsense. The weather app guessing rain for Thursday. A game reminding me to collect a daily reward for a world where monsters can be fed with taps. I turned the screen face down like a child trying to hide something under a napkin and slept leaning against the door. For a week I was sensible. Sensible looks like waking on time and shaving and telling Victor thanks for the jump pack. Sensible looks like not walking past the fence and not angling my gaze toward the rock face and not wondering if the platform had a second exit. Sensible tastes like milk that's gone off yesterday, but not today. It tastes safe until it doesn't. On Friday, a bulletin went out to municipal employees. Missing maintenance worker, last seen near the yard. Family concerned. His name was Eddie. The man with the city jacket in the weeds had not lied. No one did anything about the yard because no one does anything about a place that has already decided not to be solved. On Sunday, I drove south out of town, found Harrow Cove where the university had pressed itself against the cliff, and asked the ocean to applaud. I asked a bored graduate student in a windbreaker if the old Halcyon records were public. He told me yes in the tone of someone giving a menu to a person who will eventually choose the wrong thing. In the basement, a woman with hands too thin for her age pulled boxes from shelves and watched me read notes typed by men of my grandfather's generation, men who signed letters with respect and intended consequence, men who believed the earth could be convinced to cooperate if only it were approached with enough Latin. A memo dated from a winter older than me said, excavation paused due to substructure instability. Withdrew from cavity an object approximately 18 inches in height, resembling a bell. Subject produced low-frequency vibration, unverified during handling. Potential hazard to hearing, potential hazard to men. Recommend storage off-site, further testing suspended. A second memo in the same hand had been stamped with a word I have never liked, reconsidered. In the margin, a pencil note, do not answer. Did they keep the bells? I asked the archivist, because the question had claws. Of course they did, she said. You don't dig something up just to put it back. That would imply humility. Where are they? She smiled with a kindness that made me want to be better. The inventory is incomplete, she said. On my way out of the building, a young man in a lab coat held the door for me with an absent courtesy and then turned back because I had not flown into the air and dissolved. Be careful, he said, lowering his voice like a child, telling a ghost not to wake the house. The acoustics do not belong to us. Back home, the radiator knocked 3 times, long, short, long. When I answered the sound with movement, standing, opening the window, the silence stilled like a deer. I shut the window and sat down again and drank the coffee I hadn't wanted. I watched the door and realized I was 50-50 on whether I wanted someone to knock. It wasn't a knock. It was the slow drag of something heavy across the hall. It stopped outside my door and then went on, friendly, as if not wanting to startle. After a while, a child laughed 1 floor up, and my throat loosened, and I believed in human noises again. If I were wiser, I would end here. If I were kinder to myself, I would go to a place with more people and fewer tunnels, and let the thing behind the wall learn to use patience on someone else. But Eddie was missing, and the man in the lot had told me he watched a friend come out wrong and go back, and the smaller creature had placed its limb over bells, as if guarding something that did not deserve to be rung. There is a shape of responsibility that isn't noble and isn't fatal. It's just the thing you can't not do. I went at noon. Rules of old superstitions say noon is safer. The sun turns things into facts. I climbed the fence where the sag was. The lot baked, weeds jeweled with beetles. The wall looked like wall, marvelous in its dullness. I stood and waited, and told myself I was pretending to be a man who believes in dark at midday. The smell of damp fur visited like a memory someone else loaned me. The arch found itself. The air admitted the cold. I went in before I could narrate it. The tunnel swallowed light the way a dream will. The platform had more shoes, an order to them I hadn't noticed. Smallest to largest, nearest the office. The map on the wall had grown another crack down the coast. The pool at the 3rd rail had less dust. The room behind it breathed in a way rooms don't. In the office, the folders sat where I had put it, a paper on top I hadn't read. Minutes from a meeting where a director told a committee that the community would be proud to host an experiment in resonance. Someone had written in the margin, haven't we been resonant enough? In the chamber, the smaller creature lay with its limbs tucked under, not asleep, exactly, but in the way of waiting. The larger stood beside the heap, one limb braced, the other touching the floor with a gentleness that changed how I understood it. On the far side, a human thing moved. I froze. The human thing raised a hand. I recognized the cheap green jacket I had seen on posters stapled to telephone poles. Eddie. He was folded partly into the wall, as if the place had been growing a niche around him. His eyes tracked me with the slow focus of a man halfway out of anesthesia. Hey, I said, and the word felt obscene. He didn't answer. He tilted his head a quarter inch. The creature turned its knot head toward me, as if to say he was not mine to collect. On the floor by Eddie's feet, a pair of boots sat neatly aligned, laces tucked in. We had the same size feet, I thought, because the brain picks a hill to die on and calls it relevance. I can get you out, I said, and the chamber shifted, a disapproval, not angry but weary. The creature beneath the scars reached toward the bells, then stopped 2 inches short, as if reconsidering a habit in front of company. Help me, Eddie said finally, and the voice was his and not his, like a radio tuned between stations, the content the same, the carrier different. How? I asked, because I wanted him to tell me to do a human thing. Throw a rope, make a call, cut a line. He turned his head toward the bells. The smaller tightened, a flinch so small my body noticed before my mind did. No, I said, we don't ring. If we ring, we don't leave. He looked at me then, really looked, and in his eyes I saw a terrible familiar, not pleading, understanding. He knew the rules here. He had come to an arrangement. Maybe he liked the order. Maybe the hallway outside his apartment smelled like cooked cabbage and bleach, and here it smelled like antiseptic and fur, and he had decided those were both homes. He touched the wall with his hand, the wall indented, obliging, and then held his palm, and then let it go. Tell them I'm okay, he said. Tell them I went away. I won't, I said. I won't make you into a lie. Then tell them I died clean, he said, and smiled in a way I hope I never have to watch again. It was a good smile, the kind you give a person you don't want to make feel bad. Tell them I had my shoes on. I stepped backward until the door admitted I had permission to leave. The creature watched me without blinking. The smaller placed its limb over the bells again, like a parent placing a hand on a fevered brow. I did not run. I found the platform. The pool sighed once, a child asleep. I walked the slope and the alcoves in the tide of cold, and the mouths that are rooms and the rooms that are mouths, and I came out into afternoon, hard enough that I had to put my hand up to shade my eyes. The city jacket man was not in the weeds, which I suppose is its own kindness. On the fence, 6 inches from where I'd climbed, a sign had been screwed in since morning. No trespassing, unstable ground. The letters were black with the confidence of someone sure. The right words will keep the right bodies safe. I laughed once because laughing keeps sounds from arranging themselves into orders you can't obey. I didn't make a poster for Eddie. I didn't staple anything to any pole. When the city clerk asked if anyone had seen him, I said no, and I hated myself for it less than I thought I would. The man in the jacket found me outside Finnegan's and did not look at me and said, "You don't come back wrong." And I understood. I had passed a test with criteria I preferred not to learn. I asked him his name. He shook his head. He said, "You don't need to call me." And I believed him. On nights now when the wind blows down the hill and picks up the smell of weeds and rust and that deeper wrong, I wake and sit on the edge of the bed and hold my shoes for a while, both of them, one in each hand, paired, as if reminding myself that order can be a kindness. I put them side by side under the chair. I lie down and listen to the radiator invent languages. I let my phone vibrate with the stupid news of the world, and I don't answer. In the morning, I make coffee. I tie my laces. I go to work the long way. I see Victor, and he tells me new rules for Jerry's shop, and I practice believing in the ordinary, because practice makes muscles that keep you upright. Sometimes, walking past the fence, I see the arch where there shouldn't be one. Sometimes the weeds stand shorter, as if something has pushed them down gently to apologize. Sometimes I smell antiseptic and paper and fur on the breeze. I keep my hands at my sides. I don't pull at vines. I don't look for shoes. I don't ring anything. Once at noon on a day so bright even the pigeons squinted, the arch did not appear, but the cold did, a pocket of winter on my face. I stood with the sun on my neck and the chill on my mouth, and I said I know. The air eased, a scrap of paper lifted from the ballast and tumbled to the fence and stuck there in the chain link. I plucked it without thinking and turned it over, half a memo from an old file. 2 words legible, do not, no signature, no line drawn under it to make it law. I folded it and put it in my pocket without making it into anything more than what it was. If you need a moral, I don't have one. If you need me to have gone in with rope and brought a man out, I'm sorry. I know how to throw a line. I know how to cinch a knot. The problem with some knots is that you don't know which end is the one you'll be cutting later to save yourself. I did the thing I could live with. I recognized a door and left it to be a door. I let a creature arrange its bells and its gifts without adding to the collection. I told no one anything that would make them curious enough to gift themselves. There's a city under ours that never got funded. It learned to make its own patrons. It learned to arrange what we offered into orders that pleased its tongue. It learned to be polite. It learned to wait. That's not a myth. That's budget and failure and dirt and the long echo in a place we packed with our best plans and our worst habits. It is creature and it is consequence. It has a mouth and it has a map. I have a pair of shoes I put side by side in the dark. We are even as far as I can make it. Thank you for listening. If this story kept you company tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing for more myths, legends, and gentle hauntings. Sleep well, and may the trails you choose lead you safely home.